Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in Invincible as Sukuna, the Honored King? Part 6. If you enjoy this kind of content, please hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Now, let's dive into the rise of the Honored King without further ado. The ruins of the Grayson home lay scattered across what had once been a peaceful suburban lawn. Broken timber, shattered concrete, and fragments of family memories created a desolate landscape, a fitting arena for the confrontation about to unfold. Emperor Mark stood amid the devastation, his expression calm despite the destruction surrounding him. The rage that had nearly consumed him earlier had cooled into something more controlled, more focused, but no less dangerous. Across from him, Yukuna's lips curved into a cold smile, cursed energy visibly manifesting around him in patterns that spoke of ancient, terrible power. "Let us see if the Emperor deserves his crown," Yukuna said, his voice carrying an ancient quality that belied his youthful appearance. Emperor Mark's eyes narrowed, the air around him beginning to shimmer with power. "You are but a shadow of the Megumi I knew, a crude predecessor to his greatness. But if combat is what you seek..." He moved into a fighting stance, his eyes locked on Yukuna's. "Then I will oblige." Without warning, Yukuna extended his hand, unleashing a wave of invisible cutting force dismantle aimed directly at Emperor Mark's throat. The attack moved with impossible speed, yet Emperor Mark reacted faster, vanishing from his position and reappearing 10 feet to the left, the cutting force passing harmlessly through empty air. "Interesting," Emperor Mark observed, his expression unchanged despite the lethal intent of the attack. "Some kind of energy projection capability." Yukuna's eyes narrowed slightly. "You move well for a brute," he acknowledged. "But speed alone won't save you." The air around Yukuna shimmered subtly as he activated Infinity Gojo's limitless technique that he had copied through Yuta's ability. Though invisible to the naked eye, the technique created an absolute defense, ensuring anything approaching him would slow to a stop before making contact. Emperor Mark sensed the change, though he couldn't identify its nature. Something in the air had shifted, a distortion in the space surrounding his opponent. "Your power signature is unusual," Emperor Mark noted, circling slowly. "Different from the four-armed version, yet similar in its fundamental nature." "I am the original," Yukuna replied, his voice dripping with arrogance. "The true king of curses. What you encountered was merely a derivative." Emperor Mark's expression darkened. "He is the perfected version. The one who guided me, taught me, made me what I am today." "Perfected?" Yukuna laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "No. Diluted, perhaps. Compromised by humanity." Without further preamble, Yukuna unleashed a barrage of attacks, invisible cutting forces radiating outward in all directions, followed by a massive serpent manifested from shadow that lunged toward Emperor Mark with frightening speed. The Emperor moved with fluid grace, dodging the cutting forces and meeting the serpent head-on. His fist connected with the shadow creature's head, the impact creating a shockwave that shattered windows for blocks around. To his surprise, the shadow-like serpent didn't disintegrate but instead wrapped around his arm, its shadowy form constricting with unexpected strength. "A physical manifestation," Emperor Mark noted, his scientific mind analyzing even as he fought. "Fascinating." With a flex of his arm, he shattered the serpent's form, the shadow fragments dissipating into the air. But ultimately ineffective. Yukuna remained unperturbed, already summoning 2 new Shikigami divine dogs that circled Emperor Mark with predatory focus, their shadowy forms moving with unnatural speed. "Your pets are impressive," Emperor Mark acknowledged, tracking their movements with ease. "But they're not what I'm here for." He blurred into motion, his speed so great that even Yukuna's enhanced perception struggled to follow. The divine dogs were dispatched with casual brutality, their forms dissolving as Emperor Mark's hands passed through them. In the same motion, he continued toward Yukuna, his fist aimed directly at the sorcerer's heart. The attack should have been fatal, Emperor Mark's strength was sufficient to punch through mountains, to shatter planets with concentrated force. Yet as his fist approached Sukuna, it slowed, as if moving through increasingly dense material, until it stopped completely mere millimeters from its target. Emperor Mark's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine surprise he had shown. "What is this?" Sukuna smiled, cold and triumphant. "A barrier that cannot be crossed," he explained, though the specifics would mean nothing to the Emperor. "The space between us extends infinitely. You can never reach me, no matter how fast or strong you are." Emperor Mark withdrew his hand, reassessing his opponent with new respect. "A spatial manipulation ability," he concluded. "Impressive, but not insurmountable." He had encountered similar powers during his conquest of the universe, beings who could warp space, create dimensional pockets, manipulate the fabric of reality itself. None had ultimately stood against him. Sukuna, reading the confidence in the Emperor's stance, decided to escalate. "Let's see how you handle this, Your Majesty." The air between them distorted as Sukuna activated Cursed Technique Lapse. Blue, a devastating attraction force that should have pulled Emperor Mark toward him with irresistible power. To Sukuna's surprise, the Emperor barely moved, his body remaining firmly in place despite the enormous gravitational pull. The ground beneath him cracked and splintered, debris from the ruined house swirled into the vortex, but Emperor Mark himself stood unmoved. "Impressive," the Emperor acknowledged, "but futile. My cellular structure responds to my will alone." Without warning, he clapped his hands together with tremendous force, creating a pressure wave that rippled outward with devastating effect. The shock wave struck infinity and dissipated, but not before causing the barrier to visibly fluctuate. Sukuna narrowed his eyes, reassessing his opponent. This being's physical capabilities exceeded his expectations, not merely strong, but possessing a level of control over his own body that bordered on molecular manipulation. Unknown to Sukuna, this very reason, the fact that Mark could control his smart atoms on such a level that few things could truly break apart his structure, is why he is called the Invincible Emperor. Perhaps it's time for a more direct approach, Sukuna decided, gathering cursed energy for his next technique. The air around him began to shimmer with power as he prepared to activate Hollow Purple, a devastating combination of attraction and repulsion forces that would erase anything in its path. Emperor Mark, sensing the building energy, decided preemptive action was necessary. He moved again, this time flying upward at tremendous speed before diving directly at Sukuna from above, his body breaking the sound barrier multiple times during the maneuver. As he approached, he noted with satisfaction that Sukuna's attention was divided, focused on maintaining his defensive barrier while simultaneously gathering energy for his attack. It created a momentary weakness in the spatial distortion surrounding him. Emperor Mark adjusted his trajectory slightly, aiming not directly at Sukuna but at the ground beneath him. His impact created a crater 50 feet wide, the shockwave sending Sukuna tumbling through the air despite his defensive barrier. Before Sukuna could recover, Emperor Mark was on him, delivering a series of strikes so fast they appeared as a single motion. Each blow tested the limits of infinity, probing for weaknesses, applying pressure from multiple angles simultaneously. Sukuna, recognizing the danger, abandoned his attempt at Hollow Purple and focused entirely on maintaining infinity while creating distance between himself and the Emperor. For unlike Satoru Gojo, Sukuna could not maintain it without conscious effort. "You're more resourceful than I anticipated," Sukuna acknowledged, his voice betraying no concern despite the intensity of the assault. "But you still don't understand what you're facing." Emperor Mark paused, hovering in the air a short distance away. "I understand enough," he replied coldly. "You claim to be what Megumi once was, the original from which he evolved. Yet everything about you, your methods, your demeanor, your very essence, confirms what I already knew." His eyes hardened with contempt. "You are inferior, a crude prototype of the being who helped me build an empire." Sukuna's expression darkened with rage. "Inferior? I am Ryaman Sukuna, the king of curses, feared across centuries, worshipped as a god. You dare dash, I dare because I have seen what you could become," Emperor Mark interrupted. "And it is greater than anything you currently are." The dismissal struck Sukuna like a physical blow, his pride wounded more deeply than any attack. "Then let me show you the full extent of what I am," he snarled, his composure cracking under the weight of his wounded ego. The air around them began to shift, reality itself seeming to warp as Sukuna initiated his domain expansion. Black lines spread outward from his position, beginning to form the boundary of his territory. Emperor Mark, observing the strange phenomenon, immediately recognized it as a threat. Though he didn't understand the nature of domain expansion, his tactical instincts warned him that allowing the technique to complete would be disastrous. Without hesitation, he charged forward at his maximum speed, aiming to disrupt whatever process was occurring. As the black lines began to solidify into a barrier, Emperor Mark reached its edge and struck with all his might. The partially formed domain shuddered under the impact, cracks spreading across its surface like spiderwebs. Sukuna grimaced, pouring more cursed energy into maintaining the technique, but the Emperor's assault was relentless. With a sound like shattering glass magnified 1,000-fold, the domain collapsed, the backlash of cursed energy washing over both combatants in a wave of destructive force. Emperor Mark emerged unscathed, his cellular structure adapting instantly to neutralize any damage. Sukuna was less fortunate. The failure of his domain expansion had temporarily disrupted his control over infinity, leaving him vulnerable. In that moment of weakness, Emperor Mark struck. His movement was too fast for even Sukuna's enhanced perception to track, appearing beside the cursed spirit and delivering a devastating blow to his midsection. The impact sent Sukuna crashing through what remained of the Grayson home and into the street beyond, his body carving a trench in the asphalt as he skidded to a stop nearly 100 yards away. Emperor Mark followed at a measured pace, his expression calm as he approached his fallen opponent. "Your abilities are impressive," he acknowledged, "but ultimately insufficient." To his surprise, Sukuna began to laugh, a cold, amused sound that seemed at odds with his current condition. "You think this is victory?" he asked, rising to his feet with unnatural grace despite his injuries. "This is merely education." Before Emperor Mark could respond, Sukuna unleashed a new technique, the world-cleaving dismantle. The invisible cutting force expanded outward in a perfect circle, slicing through everything in its path. Emperor Mark attempted to evade, but the technique's range was too wide, its speed too great. The cutting force passed through him, cleaving his body in half at the waist. For a moment, the Emperor looked almost surprised as his upper body separated from his lower half, both parts falling to the ground with a heavy thud. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the cracked asphalt in a widening circle. Sukuna approached cautiously, maintaining infinity around himself as he studied his handiwork. "Not so invincible after all," he observed, satisfaction evident in his voice. His triumph was short-lived. Emperor Mark's eyes snapped open, blazing with determination rather than pain or fear. With shocking coordination, his upper body reached out, grabbing his severed lower half and pulling it toward him. As the two halves made contact, something extraordinary happened. The flesh began to knit together, cells reconnecting, organs repairing, bone fusing with bone. Within seconds, the Emperor was whole again, rising to his feet as if nothing had happened. "An interesting experience," he commented, brushing dust from his costume with casual nonchalance. "I've been bisected before, but rarely so cleanly." Sukuna's eyes narrowed, reassessing his opponent with new caution. "Your regenerative capabilities are unexpected." "My cellular structure responds to my will," Emperor Mark explained, flexing his fingers as if testing that everything was in working order. "Any damage can be repaired." He smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "Now, shall we continue this pointless exercise? Or do you concede that you are, as I said, merely a shadow of what I seek?" Sukuna's pride warred with his pragmatism. This opponent's physical capabilities and regenerative powers exceeded his expectations, making conventional attacks ineffective. A successful domain expansion might work, but the Emperor had already demonstrated his ability to disrupt the technique before completion. The realization that he might not be able to defeat this being in direct combat stung Sukuna's pride, but he was nothing if not practical. If he couldn't win through force, perhaps there were other ways to achieve his goals. As Emperor Mark advanced, preparing to continue their battle, Yakuna suddenly activated a complex pattern of cursed energy that he had been subtly weaving throughout their confrontation, not too different from what Kenjaku many times does. The air behind him shimmered and tore, creating a dimensional rift. Emperor Mark sensed the shift in energy and reacted instantly, his expression darkening with rage. "Fleeing already," he snarled, lunging forward with impossible speed. But Yakuna was already moving. Stepping backward into the dimensional tear he had prepared as a contingency. "Another time, Emperor," he called, his voice fading as the rift began to close. "When the odds are more favorable." Emperor Mark's fist struck the space where Yakuna had been a millisecond earlier, encountering nothing but empty air as the dimensional tear sealed itself with a sound like tearing fabric. For a moment, the Emperor stood motionless, his rage a palpable force that cracked the ground beneath his feet. Then, with deliberate control, he reined in his anger, his expression settling into cold calculation. "A strategic retreat," he observed to the empty air. "Wise, if cowardly. You recognized your inferiority and fled rather than face certain defeat." He surveyed the devastated landscape, the ruined home, the cratered street, the evidence of their brief but intense battle. Despite Yakuna's escape, Emperor Mark had achieved a victory of sorts. He had confirmed his superiority over this lesser version, this shadow of the being he truly sought. And sunset was still hours away. Time enough to plan his next move. With casual grace, Emperor Mark rose into the air, flying to the top of a nearby hill that overlooked the city. There, amid the ruins of what had once been a small observation point for tourists, he seated himself on a broken slab of concrete. One arm rested on his knee, the other leg dangling over the edge of the hill, his cape billowing behind him in the wind. From this vantage point, he could see the sprawling cityscape below, including the distant shape of what must be the Global Defense Agency headquarters. The chance Megumi was there was slim. He could charge there, but in the end decided against it. Him letting the others do the searching was merely an excuse, more of a psychological pressure, for in fact, he wanted Megumi to come to him himself. It is why he remained in place after all. The Megumi he had known would have appreciated such methodical planning, strategy over brute force, precision over chaos. "Soon," Emperor Mark murmured, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone unaccustomed to failure. "Soon we will be reunited, old friend. And this world, like so many others, will bend to our will." As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the Emperor remained motionless on his makeshift throne, a solitary figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Waiting. Planning. Certain of his eventual victory. The hunt for Sukuna would resume at sunset if he didn't come himself. And this time, nothing would stand in his way. In the GDA monitoring room, both versions of Cecil watched the empty ruins where Emperor Mark and Yakuna had been moments before. The sudden disappearance of both beings from their surveillance feed left them momentarily confused. "What just happened?" Original Cecil demanded, adjusting controls to scan for any trace of the combatants. A technician pointed to a secondary monitor. "Sir, we've located one of them. The Emperor. He's taken position on Observatory Hill, approximately 3 miles from the Grayson residence." The monitor shifted to show Emperor Mark seated amid the ruins of the hill's observation point, his imposing figure unmistakable even from a distance. "And the other one? The Sukuna variant?" Altered Cecil asked. "No sign, sir," the technician replied. "One moment he was there, the next, nothing. Our sensors detected a brief energy spike consistent with dimensional distortion, but we couldn't track it." The two Cecils exchanged concerned glances. "He's planning something," Original Cecil stated grimly. "Sitting there like a predator surveying his hunting ground." "We need to warn Sukuna immediately of what happened in the fight," his counterpart agreed. "And prepare for what comes at sunset." The dimensional energy continued to pulse across the sky in eerie waves of green light as Sukuna and Eve soared above the clouds, leaving the chaos of the city far behind. They flew side by side, Eve propelled by her pink molecular energy, while Sukuna used his newly integrated smart atoms to keep pace with effortless precision. "Are you certain this is wise?" Eve asked, glancing over at him with a mixture of concern and excitement in her eyes. "With Emperor Mark actively hunting for you, Perhaps we should remain at the facility. Sukuna's lips quirked slightly. The Emperor has no intention of forcing a confrontation until after sunset. It's a psychological tactic, designed to make me choose to come to him willingly. And you know this how? Eve pressed, executing a playful barrel roll around him as they flew, her momentary joy breaking through her scientific demeanor. Because it's what I would do, Sukuna replied simply. And despite his differences, he thinks as I would. As Megumi would. Strategy over brute force. Patience over impulse. Eve couldn't argue with that logic. If anyone could read the Emperor's playbook, it would be Sukuna. Still, the thought of deliberately leaving the safety of the GDA facility made her stomach flutter with anxiety that had nothing to do with her aerial maneuvers. But they had to. The privacy was necessary from the marks. Other Eve, Nolan, Debbie's, and Uncle Kenji. Besides, Sukuna continued, his tone softening slightly, we've been in crisis mode since this whole merger began. A brief respite will sharpen our minds, not dull them. Well, this is new, Eve smiled despite her concerns. I used to practically have to drag you away from training. When did you start advocating for breaks? Perhaps I've learned to value certain distractions, he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her nearly drop a few feet in altitude. They continued flying in comfortable silence, the world spreading out beneath them like a patchwork quilt gone wrong. The dimensional merger had created a landscape that defied all natural laws. Mountain ranges that shouldn't exist alongside familiar landmarks, rivers flowing in impossible patterns, forests and deserts existing side by side. Eve suddenly banked sharply to the east, picking up speed. Race you there, she called over her shoulder, her scientific composure momentarily forgotten in a burst of playfulness. Sukuna didn't respond verbally, but the subtle acceleration of his flight was answer enough. He kept pace easily, his control over his newly integrated smart atoms allowing him to match her most complex aerial maneuvers without visible effort. We're almost there, Eve announced as they began their descent, passing through a layer of clouds that scattered like pink-tinged cotton candy around her energy field. Below them, a hidden valley revealed itself, a secret paradise nestled between two mountain ranges that had somehow survived the dimensional upheaval intact. A crystal-clear lake shimmered at its center, fed by a waterfall that cascaded down from the surrounding cliffs. The shoreline was ringed with wildflowers in impossible hues, their colors almost painfully vibrant. I discovered this location several months ago, Eve explained as they landed gently on a small grassy promontory overlooking the lake. It's become my sanctuary, my place to think when everything becomes overwhelming. You're the first person I've ever brought here. Sukuna surveyed the valley with appreciative eyes, noting the perfect isolation, the natural beauty, the strategic value of a location unknown to others. It's suitable, he said, which from him was practically a standing ovation. Such enthusiasm. Eve laughed, her formal demeanor slipping again as she gently nudged his shoulder. Try not to strain yourself with all that excessive praise. The corner of Sukuna's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. It's beautiful, he amended, his voice carrying a sincerity that made Eve's smile widen. From a small pocket dimension she had created with her molecular manipulation, Eve produced a blanket and a basket containing food and drink, a picnic prepared hastily before their departure from the GDA facility. I apologize for the simplicity, she said, spreading the blanket on the grass with a flick of her powers. Just some sandwiches and fruit. And wine, because I thought we could use it after everything we've experienced. It's more than adequate, Sukuna replied, seating himself on the blanket with fluid grace. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the play of light on the lake's surface. The dimensional energy in the sky cast strange, shifting patterns across the water, creating an otherworldly light show that was both beautiful and slightly unsettling. Do you remember our first date? Eve asked suddenly, breaking the silence. At that Thai restaurant, after we secured the quantum module? Sukuna nodded, the memory clear despite everything that had happened since. You were nervous, he observed. Your molecular control was fluctuating. The silverware vibrated when you picked it up. Was it that obvious? Eve laughed, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. And here I thought I was maintaining perfect composure. To most, it wouldn't have been noticeable, Sukuna assured her. But I observe carefully. Sometimes too carefully, Eve teased, pouring them each a glass of wine. Like how you pretended not to notice me studying your movements for weeks before that. I noticed, Sukuna confirmed, accepting the glass. I simply saw no reason to acknowledge it. And now? Eve asked, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Do you regret acknowledging it? Acknowledging me? Sukuna studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. No, he said finally, the single word carrying more weight than a lengthy declaration might have from someone else. Good answer, Eve smiled, clinking her glass against his. They fell into easy conversation about simpler times, training sessions with Mark, Eve's laboratory experiments that occasionally yielded unexpected results. Quiet evenings spent discussing everything from quantum physics to philosophical questions about the nature of the world. For a brief, precious time, they were just two people enjoying each other's company. The apocalyptic scenario unfolding across the world temporarily forgotten. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across their private valley, Eve's expression grew more serious. What's your plan? She asked directly, setting down her wine glass. For the Mad Emperor? For this dimensional merger? For all of it? Sukuna was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant waterfall. I would prefer to keep that to myself for now, he said finally. Eve's eyes narrowed instantly, her scientist brain switching to full analysis mode. It's dangerous, isn't it? She said, her formal demeanor giving way to emotional directness. Whatever you're planning, it's something incredibly risky. Something you don't want to tell me because you know I'll object. Sukuna began, but she cut him off. No, don't Eve me with that tone, she said, pink energy flaring briefly around her hands as her emotions took control. I know you too well now. I can read between the lines. You're planning something self-sacrificial, aren't you? Sukuna's expression remained impassive, but his silence was answer enough. Damn it, Megumi. Eve rarely used his original name, saving it for moments when her emotions overwhelmed her careful scientific demeanor. After everything we've been through, you still think you need to face things alone? That's not how this works. Not how we work. Some battles cannot be shared, Sukuna replied, his voice calm despite her outburst. That's completely unacceptable, and you know it, Eve responded, rising to her feet as her composure fractured further. We're stronger together. Whatever plan you've devised, whatever you're facing, let me help. Let me be there. Sukuna stood as well, looking down at her with those intense eyes that always made her feel like he was seeing straight through to her soul. It's not a question of strength, he said quietly. It's a question of necessity. Necessity? Eve repeated incredulously. Is it necessary to keep me in the dark? To make decisions that affect both of us without even consulting me? If those decisions protect you, yes, Sukuna stated firmly. These words themselves still surprised Sukuna that they fell off his tongue. He, the once cruel, aloof, tyrannical king, who ruled the Heian era with an iron fist, stating something so soft, gentle. He understood that this was love. This was being in love, a feeling he had never experienced previously in any of his lives. He still couldn't understand how people could stand it, to care so much for another, and yet, he still liked it. It was a pleasure that was akin to a seasoning that was applicable to any food, for whenever he was with Eve, wherever it was, he felt incredible joy. I don't need protection. Eve's voice rose, her frustration evident as small objects around them began to float in response to her agitated molecular control. I need partnership. I need you to understand that whatever happens to you happens to me too, because that's what it means to be together. Sukuna was silent for a moment, studying her with an unreadable expression. Then, with uncharacteristic gentleness, he reached out to touch her face. Trust me, he said simply, the words both a request and a promise. Eve's anger deflated visibly. That's not fair, she whispered, leaning into his touch despite herself. You know I trust you more than anyone. Then trust that whatever I do, whatever plan I execute, it will be with one purpose above all others, Sukuna continued, his voice low and intense. To ensure your survival. Your future. His continued existence as well, of course. But continued existence is not the same as not dying. Death has after all never truly earned him. I don't want a future without you in it, Eve replied, her voice cracking slightly. Don't you understand that by now? Instead of answering with words, Sukuna leaned down, capturing her lips with his own. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more desperate. Eve responded immediately, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer as if she could somehow keep him safe through sheer physical proximity. The pink energy that constantly surrounded Eve intensified, enveloping them both in a cocoon of molecular manipulation that responded to her emotional state. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only this moment, this connection between them. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Eve's eyes were shining with unshed tears and fierce determination. "Promise me," she demanded. "Promise me you'll come back to me, no matter what your plan entails." Sukuna hesitated, which was unlike him. He pushed any doubts away. "I promise." She immediately met him with another kiss at the reassurance, deeper and more insistent than the first. This time, there was no gentleness, only raw need and desire that swept away all other considerations. Warning! 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 Slightly lemon scene ahead. They sank back onto the blanket together, hands exploring with urgent precision. Eve's fingers traced the contours of Sukuna's chest, feeling the musculature beneath his skin, while his hands moved to the small of her back, pulling her closer against him. Their bodies pressed together, separated only by the increasingly inconvenient barrier of clothing. Sukuna's lips moved from hers to trace a path along her jawline, then down the sensitive skin of her neck, drawing a soft gasp from Eve as he found a particularly responsive spot. Her hands tangled in his hair, guiding him as her head tilted back to grant him better access. With deliberate slowness, he began to remove her clothing, piece by piece, his eyes never leaving hers as each new expanse of skin was revealed. Eve's breath caught in her throat at the intensity of his gaze, the raw hunger there balanced by something deeper, something that spoke of possession and protection in equal measure. When she was fully bared to him, she reached for his clothes with trembling hands, her usual scientific precision abandoned in favor of urgent need. He helped her, his movements efficient where hers were clumsy with desire, until they were skin to skin, nothing between them but the charged air and the soft glow of Eve's molecular energy. "You're beautiful," Sukuna murmured, the rare compliment making Eve's heart race even faster. She pulled him down to her, their bodies aligning perfectly as they had so many times before, yet somehow different now, more desperate, more meaningful, as if both sensed that this moment might be precious beyond measure. Their coupling was intense from the first movement, Eve's back arching as Sukuna entered her with a single fluid motion that drew a cry from her lips. Her hands clutched at his shoulders, nails digging into his skin as he established a rhythm that quickly had her gasping his name. The molecular energy surrounding them pulsed with each movement, responding to Eve's pleasure in waves of pink light that rippled outward across the valley. Flowers bloomed spontaneously around their blanket, grass grew inches in seconds, and the very air seemed to shimmer with the force of her unconscious manipulation. Sukuna's control was perfect, his movements precisely calibrated to bring Eve the maximum pleasure, his own release held in check through sheer force of will. He watched her face with intense focus, noting each reaction, each shift in her expression as he adjusted his angle, his depth, his speed. Eve's scientific mind was completely overwhelmed by sensation, all her careful analysis abandoned as her body responded to his with increasing urgency. Her powers flared with each surge of pleasure, creating small molecular distortions in the air around them that refracted light in impossible patterns. When her climax finally came, it was with an intensity that momentarily disrupted her control completely. A wave of pink energy exploded outward from her body, causing the lake below to briefly ripple in perfect concentric circles and the flowers around them to suddenly grow to 3 times their normal size. Sukuna followed her over the edge moments later, his own release accompanied by a subtle pulse of cursed energy that merged with her molecular field, creating an ethereal display of intertwined power that lit up the valley like a miniature aurora. End of slightly lemon scene. They remained joined for several long moments afterward, both breathing heavily, Eve's body still trembling with aftershocks as Sukuna held her close. When he finally moved to lie beside her, she immediately curled against him, her head finding its familiar place on his chest. They lay together in comfortable silence, Eve's head resting on Sukuna's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that mingled strangely with the green dimensional energy still pulsing overhead. "We should return soon," Sukuna said softly, his fingers tracing idle patterns along Eve's spine. "Sunset approaches." Eve nodded, but made no move to rise. "Just a few more minutes," she murmured, her eyes closed as she savored the moment. "The world can end without us for a little longer." Sukuna didn't argue, content to grant her this small request. As they lay there in comfortable silence, his enhanced senses detected something that gave him pause. A subtle change in Eve's molecular structure, a shift so slight that even she herself likely hadn't noticed it yet. A new energy signature, tiny but distinct, had formed within her. A spark of life, created from their union, already beginning its journey toward becoming something more. An impossibility made possible through the merger of two extraordinary beings. Sukuna's hand moved almost unconsciously to rest protectively over Eve's abdomen, though he said nothing of what he had detected. This knowledge, this unexpected development, would remain his secret for now, one more reason to ensure that whatever happened in the coming confrontation, Eve would survive it. That he would be there for her and what was going to come. Something that will change his life forever. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, casting their valley into shadow, they reluctantly rose and prepared to return. The moment of peace was over, reality awaited. "Are you ready?" Eve asked, her hand finding his as she gathered her molecular energy around herself, her composure restored now that they were returning to their responsibilities. Sukuna nodded, his expression unreadable as always, but his grip on her hand firm and sure. His own energy flared as he activated his smart atoms for flight. "Ready." Together, they rose into the darkening sky, flying side by side as they left their private paradise behind and headed back to face whatever fate awaited them. The dimensional energy pulsed more intensely now, as if sensing that the final act was about to begin. Sunset had come. The Emperor would be waiting. And whatever plans Sukuna had formed would soon be put into action, for better or worse. But no matter what happened next, a part of him would continue, unseen, unknown, but growing stronger with each passing moment within the woman who now flew beside him into the gathering darkness. The abandoned GDA facility lay in ruins, its once pristine laboratories now a twisted maze of collapsed walls and shattered equipment. Deep within this desolation, in a reinforced chamber that had somehow survived the structural collapse, Mad Levy hung suspended in a web of his own dimensional energy, a sickly green cocoon that pulsed erratically with each labored breath. His body was a wreck. Dehydration had hollowed his cheeks and sunken his eyes, while hunger had stripped away what little fat he possessed, leaving only wiry muscle clinging desperately to his frame. The wounds he'd sustained during his escape attempt had festered, angry red lines streaking from them like lightning across his pale skin. By all medical logic, he should have been dead days ago. Only the dimensional energy flowing through him, the same power that had driven him to madness, now kept him alive, sustaining his vital functions through sheer metaphysical force. "Water," he croaked to the empty room, his cracked lips barely able to form the word. "Please, water." As if in answer to his plea, the air before him shimmered, reality folding in on itself as a dimensional tear formed. Through this rift stepped a figure Mad Levy recognized even through his delirium, another version of himself, but changed, scarred, with exposed brain tissue visible through a cracked skull. "Look at you," Scarred Levy said, his voice a mixture of disgust and pity. "Pathetic." Mad Levy attempted to laugh, the sound emerging as a wet, rattling cough. "Brother," he managed. "You came." "Not by choice," Scarred Levy replied, approaching cautiously. His exposed brain pulsed with green energy as he assessed the situation. "The dimensional barriers are collapsing. All versions of us are being drawn together. It was only a matter of time before I found you." "Sukuna," Mad Levy whispered, his eyes rolling wildly. "Did you see him? The king of curses. The destroyer of worlds. He's here, in this reality. Just as I foresaw." Scarred Levy's expression darkened. "Your obsession with this Sukuna has caused nothing but chaos. Do you realize what you've done? The dimensional merger is accelerating beyond control. Entire realities are collapsing into one another. Good, Mad Levy hissed, a manic grin splitting his cracked lips. Let them fall. Let everything burn. As long as he burns with it. Scarred Levy studied his counterpart for a long moment, then sighed, a sound of resignation rather than sympathy. I understand revenge, he said finally. Better than most. But this goes beyond vengeance. This is madness. Is it madness to want to stop a monster? Mad Levy asked, his voice suddenly stronger, more lucid. You haven't seen what I've seen, brother. The worlds he's devoured. The lives he's destroyed. The pleasure he takes in suffering. And yet here you are, Scarred Levy observed, suffering. Dying. While he remains free. Mad Levy's eyes focused suddenly, a moment of clarity piercing through his delirium. Not for long, he whispered. The trap is set. The bait is taken. When the dimensional barriers fully collapse, when only one version of each being can remain, he will face judgment. Scarred Levy shook his head, but extended his hand nonetheless. Come. This place is no longer safe. The GDA will return eventually, and in your condition, you won't survive another interrogation. With surprising gentleness, he helped Mad Levy disentangle himself from the web of dimensional energy, supporting his emaciated frame as they moved toward the portal. Where are we going? Mad Levy asked, his momentary lucidity already fading. Somewhere to recover your strength, Scarred Levy replied. And then we'll discuss what comes next. The King of Curses must fall, Mad Levy insisted, his voice fading as they approached the dimensional tear. Promise me, brother. Promise me he will pay for what he's done. Scarred Levy paused at the threshold of the portal, looking back at the ruined facility. I promise you this, he said carefully. When the dimensions settle, when the dust clears, only one version of each being will remain. Who that will be, that's what we're going to ensure. Together, the two versions of Angstrom Levy stepped through the portal, which sealed behind them with a sound like tearing fabric, leaving only silence in the abandoned chamber. Miles away, in what had once been a thriving commercial district but now resembled a war zone, Sukuna stood facing the third and final version of himself to appear in this merged reality. Unlike the Shibuya Sukuna who had possessed Yuji Itadori, or the Yakuna who had inhabited Yutaro Katsu's body, this version appeared in his original form, the legendary King of Curses from Japan's Heian era. Heian Sukuna was magnificent in his terrifying splendor for arms, each ending in clawed fingers, skin adorned with intricate patterns, for eyes that burned with ancient malevolence. He wore traditional robes that somehow remained pristine despite the destruction surrounding them, and his very presence caused the air to distort with cursed energy. Above Sukuna's head, Maharaga's will spun silently, its metallic surface catching the last rays of the setting sun as it rotated with hypnotic regularity. Neither combatant acknowledged it, yet its presence was significant, a silent witness to the confrontation between different versions of the same being. So, Heian Sukuna said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of absolute power, another fragment of myself, split across the dimensions. How disappointing. Sukuna regarded his counterpart with cool assessment. Disappointing? Perhaps. But not surprising. The multiverse contains infinite variations, after all. Variations, Heian Sukuna repeated, contempt dripping from the word. Is that what you consider yourself? A variation? A pale shadow of the true King of Curses. Without warning, he attacked, two of his arms extending to unleash dismantle, invisible cutting force that sliced through the air toward Sukuna. Sukuna didn't use cursed energy to counter. Instead, he relied on his newly integrated smart atoms, his body moving with impossible speed and precision to evade the attack. He weaved between the invisible cutting forces and closed the distance between them with fluid grace. Heian Sukuna's eyes widened in surprise as Sukuna delivered a devastating punch to his midsection, a purely physical attack that nonetheless sent him crashing through the remains of a nearby building. Impossible, Heian Sukuna growled as he emerged from the rubble, dust falling from his robes. No mere physical attack should affect me to this degree. Perhaps your understanding of Mir is limited by your experience, Sukuna replied calmly, not bothering to pursue his advantage. Heian Sukuna's face contorted with rage. You dare mock me? I am Ryaman Sukuna, the king of curses. Feared across Japan, worshipped as a god. Entire clans of sorcerers fell before me. And yet here you stand, Sukuna observed, shouting your accomplishments like a child seeking validation. Truly, the mighty have fallen. With a roar of outrage, Heian Sukuna began to form his domain, Malevolent Shrine. Black lines started to spread outward from his position, reality itself beginning to warp as his innate domain attempted to manifest. Before the domain could fully form, Sukuna moved with blinding speed, appearing directly before Heian Sukuna. With a precise strike to his counterpart's chest, he disrupted the flow of cursed energy, causing the emerging domain to collapse before it could fully materialize. How? Heian Sukuna demanded, genuine shock registering on his face. No one can disrupt my domain formation. No one. I am not no one, Sukuna replied. I am you evolved, refined, transcended. What you are, I was. What I am, you could never become. Sun set, a new voice observed casually. Both turned to see Emperor Mark descending from the darkening sky, his cape billowing behind him as he landed with precision on a chunk of broken concrete. He surveyed the scene with calculated interest, his eyes lingering on the wheel spinning above Sukuna's head before shifting to Heian Sukuna. Another version? Emperor Mark asked, addressing Sukuna. You seem to have quite the collection of selves scattered across the multiverse, Megumi. Mark, Sukuna acknowledged, his posture relaxing slightly despite the potential threat. Right on schedule. Emperor Mark smiled, a genuine expression that held actual warmth when directed at Sukuna. Hey, when have I ever been late for something important? Especially when it comes to getting you back. His gaze shifted back to Heian Sukuna. Though I gotta say, I'm kinda curious about this primitive version of you. Is he giving you trouble? Hardly, Sukuna replied. He's merely a sideshow. An evolutionary dead end. Heian Sukuna's rage was palpable, cursed energy swirling around him in violent patterns. You speak to this human as an equal? You permit him such familiarity? Have you forgotten what you are, what we are? I haven't forgotten, Sukuna said quietly. I've evolved. Something you, apparently, never managed to do. You're holding back, Emperor Mark observed, studying Sukuna with the practiced eye of someone who had witnessed his capabilities firsthand. Why not just end this stupid show? Show him what you can really do. Patience has its virtues, Sukuna replied. Some lessons are best learned slowly. Emperor Mark laughed, a sound that contained genuine amusement. Always the teacher, aren't you? Even when facing yourself. This is why I've missed you so damn much, Megumi. No one else gets the value of the lesson itself. Their casual banter seemed to infuriate Heian Sukuna further. With a howl of rage, he launched himself at Sukuna, all four arms extended, cursed energy concentrated for a direct physical attack that would allow him to use cleave. Sukuna sidestepped the attack with contemptuous ease, delivering a precise strike to Heian Sukuna's back as he passed. The blow sent his counterpart crashing into the ground, creating a crater in the already devastated street. Pathetic, Sukuna commented, watching as Heian Sukuna struggled to rise. You rely too heavily on your cursed energy, on your reputation, on the fear you inspire. But what are you truly, without those crutches? Just another being clinging to power without purpose. Purpose. Heian Sukuna spat, blood staining his perfect teeth. What purpose does a god need beyond his own satisfaction? What meaning exists beyond power itself? That, Sukuna said softly, is precisely why you fail. With blinding speed, he closed the distance between them, delivering a series of strikes so precise and powerful that Heian Sukuna had no chance to defend himself. Each blow landed with devastating effect, targeting pressure points and energy meridians with immense accuracy. Heian Sukuna collapsed to his knees, blood flowing from multiple wounds, his cursed energy fluctuating wildly as he struggled to maintain his composure. Impossible, he gasped. staring up at Sukuna with a mixture of rage and disbelief. No mere physical attacks should affect me this way. My body is vulnerable, Sukuna finished for him. As all bodies are, when one understands their true nature. And stop repeating yourself. You sound like a fool. With a final decisive movement, Sukuna drove his fist directly into Heian Sukuna's chest. But this time, cursed energy flowed from his hand, not to destroy, but to extract. Heian Sukuna's eyes widened in horror as he felt his own cursed energy being drawn out, pulled through the point of contact into Sukuna's body. What are you doing?" he managed, his voice weakening as his power drained away. "Taking what I need," Sukuna replied calmly. "Your cursed energy will serve a greater purpose than you ever could." As the transfer neared completion, Sukuna made a swift cutting motion with his free hand. 20 perfect incisions appeared on Heian Sukuna's arms, severing his fingers with surgical precision. The digits fell to the ground, each one containing the cursed energy Sukuna had extracted. "My fingers," Heian Sukuna whispered, staring in disbelief at his mutilated hands. "My vessels. You're stealing my not stealing," Sukuna corrected. "Repurposing." As the last of the cursed energy left his body, Heian Sukuna's magnificent form began to wither. His skin lost its luster, the patterns fading like old tattoos. His extra arms shriveled, retracting into his torso with sickening cracks of bone and sinew. His extra eyes clouded over, then sank into his skull, leaving empty sockets that wept blood. "What am I becoming?" he gasped, his voice now barely audible. "A weak, lifeless, pathetic human," Sukuna replied simply. "What you always feared most." With a final rattling breath, Heian Sukuna collapsed, his body continuing to deteriorate until only a withered husk remained, a mortal shell that had once housed a god, now empty of the power that had defined it. Sukuna gathered the severed fingers, each one pulsing with cursed energy, and stored them within his own body through a technique that caused his skin to ripple and absorb them, a trick he learned from Maharaga through the use of smart atoms. Throughout the entire confrontation, the wheel above his head had continued to spin, its rotation neither slowing nor accelerating, its purpose still unrevealed. "Damn, that was impressive," Emperor Mark commented, having watched the entire exchange with calculated interest. "Though I notice you didn't go four-armed mode on him. Saving your energy for our inevitable chat, maybe." Sukuna turned to face him fully, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Perhaps." Emperor Mark's eyes narrowed, his tactical mind reassessing the situation. "No," he said slowly. "There's something else. That wheel above your head. It's been there since I got here. It's connected to whatever you're planning." He took a step forward, his casual demeanor shifting to something more dangerous. "What are you up to, Megumi? What game are you playing?" "No game," Sukuna replied. "Merely ensuring survival in the face of dimensional collapse." Emperor Mark's expression hardened. "My sentimentality has made me a fool," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "In my joy at finding you again, I momentarily forgot who you are, what you are. The strategic genius who taught me to anticipate every possibility, to never leave an outcome to chance." He took another step forward, his cape billowing in the wind that had begun to pick up as the dimensional energy in the sky intensified. "I'm sorry, my dear teacher. It was stupid of me to think you would just accept coming back to our world without looking for alternatives. If anyone could find a way to resist me, to avoid returning home, it would be you." Without warning, he moved faster than most eyes could track, his body a blur as he closed the distance between them. Sukuna reacted instantly, meeting the charge with his own enhanced speed, their collision creating a shockwave that shattered windows for blocks around. The battle that followed was a masterclass in superhuman combat. Emperor Mark attacked with the practiced precision of someone who had conquered worlds, each strike calculated to disable rather than kill, holding back significantly. Sukuna defended with equal skill, using his knowledge of martial arts and his newly enhanced physiology to counter the Emperor's superior strength. Yet he did not transform into his four-armed state, despite the clear advantage it would provide. The wheel above his head continued its steady rotation, seemingly unaffected by the violence below. "Why won't you transform?" Emperor Mark demanded as they grappled mid-air, their movements creating sonic booms that echoed across the devastated city. "Show me your true form, Megumi. Show me what you've become." "This is who I am," Sukuna replied, breaking the clinch with a technique that used Emperor Mark's own momentum against him. 4 arms or 2, the essence remains the same. They crashed back to Earth, their impact creating twin craters in the already damaged street. Emperor Mark emerged first, his costume torn but his body unmarked. "You're holding back," he accused, genuine hurt entering his voice for the first time. "After everything we've been through, everything I've done to find you, you still don't trust me." Sukuna rose more slowly, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Without his 4-armed form, his regenerative capabilities were reduced, making the physical disparity between them more apparent. "Trust has nothing to do with it," he replied calmly. "This is simply the most efficient approach to the current situation." "Efficient," Emperor Mark repeated, a bitter smile touching his lips. "Always calculating, always 3 moves ahead. It's what made you such a perfect advisor, such a brilliant strategist." His expression softened. "Such an amazing friend." Without warning, he lunged forward again, but this time his attack was different, not a strike but an embrace. His arms wrapped around Sukuna with careful strength, pinning his arms to his sides in what appeared to be a hug but functioned as an inescapable restraint. "Got you now," Emperor Mark whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "After all this time, all this searching, I've finally got you back." To Sukuna's surprise, he felt wetness against his shoulder tears, falling from the Emperor's eyes as he held him. "You're so strong now," Emperor Mark continued, his grip tightening as Sukuna tested its limits. "So much stronger than before. It's amazing, Megumi. You've evolved beyond anything I could have imagined." Despite his enhanced strength, Sukuna found himself unable to break the Emperor's hold. The Viltrumite's power was simply too great, his control too perfect. "I had plans, you know," Emperor Mark said, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone despite the tears still flowing. "For when I found you, I was gonna keep you safe in the Imperial Palace, where no one could ever hurt you again. Only Eve and I would be allowed to see you, to talk with you. The rest of the universe would have to live without your guidance, your wisdom." His grip tightened further, causing Sukuna to wince as his ribs creaked under the pressure. "But now I see I don't need to worry about that. You're strong enough to protect yourself. Strong enough to stand at my side as we rule together, like it was always meant to be." "Mark," Sukuna managed, his voice strained by the crushing embrace. "This isn't the way." "It's the only way," Emperor Mark insisted, his tone hardening even as tears continued to fall. "I lost you once. I won't lose you again. Not to death, not to dimensional collapse, not to your own stubborn independence. You're coming home with me, Megumi, where you belong." The wheel above Sukuna's head spun faster, its metallic surface catching the light of the dimensional energy that pulsed overhead with increasing intensity. "I'm sorry," Sukuna said quietly, "but I have my own path to follow." "No." Emperor Mark roared, his grief transforming instantly to rage. "You don't get to decide this time. You don't get to leave me again." His grip became punishing, threatening to crush Sukuna's ribcage despite his enhanced durability. The wheel spun faster still, its rotation now audible as a high-pitched whine that cut through the night air. Just as it seemed Sukuna might be crushed by the Emperor's desperate embrace, a blast of pink energy struck Emperor Mark from behind. The impact wasn't enough to harm him, but the surprise caused his grip to loosen momentarily, just enough for Sukuna to break free, rolling away with fluid grace. "Get away from him!" Eve shouted, hovering above them, her hands glowing with concentrated molecular energy. Her expression was fierce, protective, her usual scientific detachment replaced by raw emotion. Emperor Mark turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the newcomer. "You," he said, recognition and contempt mingling in his voice. "The pale imitation. The unworthy version." "I don't care what you think of me," Eve replied, descending to stand protectively in front of Sukuna. "But you're not taking him anywhere against his will." Emperor Mark's laugh was cold, devoid of the warmth it had held earlier when speaking with Sukuna. "Against his will?" You understand nothing. Megumi and I share a bond you couldn't possibly comprehend. A connection forged through years of shared vision, shared purpose. I understand enough, Eve countered, her hands still glowing with pink energy. I understand that you're obsessed with a memory, with a version of Megumi that doesn't exist anymore, that maybe never existed except in your mind. Emperor Mark's expression darkened dangerously. You dare dash, she's right, Sukuna interrupted, rising to his feet beside Eve. The Megumi you knew is gone, Mark. Changed by time, by circumstance, by choice. Just as you have changed. No, Emperor Mark shook his head, denial written across his features. No, I can see you, the real you, beneath whatever this world has done to you. My friend, my brother, my teacher. The one who showed me what true leadership could be. Perhaps that version of me did exist in your world, Sukuna acknowledged. But I am not him. I cannot be him, no matter how much you wish it. Emperor Mark's expression cycled through grief, rage, and finally settled on a cold determination. It doesn't matter, he decided. When the merger completes, when only one version of each being remains, you'll remember. You'll understand. And until then, I'll keep you safe, whether you want my protection or not. He moved again, this time targeting Eve, clearly intending to remove her from the equation before securing Sukuna. His speed was incredible, crossing the distance between them in a fraction of a second. But Sukuna was ready. He intercepted the Emperor mid-charge, his body moving with precision that belied his earlier difficulty breaking free from the embrace. Their collision created another shockwave that sent debris flying in all directions. You would protect her? Emperor Mark demanded, genuine hurt in his voice. This replacement? This inferior version of your true partner? I would protect what is mine, Sukuna replied simply, his stance shifting to a more aggressive posture. As would I, Emperor Mark countered, his own stance mirroring Sukuna's. And you, Megumi, have always been mine. My friend. My brother. My guide. They clashed again, their movements too fast for ordinary human perception to track. Buildings shook from the force of their impacts, the ground cracking beneath their feet as they traded blows that would have shattered mountains. Eve maintained her distance, looking for an opening to assist without getting caught in the crossfire. Her molecular control was precise, but against a being of Emperor Mark's caliber, a direct confrontation would be suicidal. The battle carried them across the devastated commercial district, through abandoned buildings and across empty streets. Wherever they touched down, destruction followed, concrete pulverized, steel bent, glass shattered into dust. Throughout it all, the wheel above Sukuna's head continued to spin, its rotation now so fast that it appeared as a solid disk of light rather than a spoked wheel. The wheel, Eve murmured to herself, her mind analyzing its purpose even amid the chaos. It's related to his plan. It's been spinning since he returned from dealing with the other Sukuna variants. She watched as Sukuna fought defensively, never transforming into his four-armed state despite the clear disadvantage he faced against Emperor Mark's overwhelming physical power. He's stalling, she realized suddenly, waiting for something to complete. Emperor Mark seemed to reach the same conclusion. With a burst of speed that left a sonic boom in his wake, he disengaged from Sukuna and shot upward, aiming directly for the spinning wheel. No! Sukuna shouted, genuine alarm in his voice for the first time. Too late. Emperor Mark's hand closed around the wheel, his fingers gripping the spinning metal with enough force to stop its rotation instantly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like shattering glass magnified 1,000-fold, the wheel cracked. Fractures spread across its surface like lightning, each one glowing with an inner light that seemed to intensify as it spread. Until finally, within the Mad Emperor's grip, the heavenly wheel shattered into 1,000 pieces. There, whatever you were planning has failed, the Emperor stated as he opened his palm, and the pieces within it fell with the others to the ground. Sukuna's expression seeing this turned into a seething rage. Now, Mark continued as he extended his hand, his face softening, the tear streak still on his face. Come back with me. You have nothing left you can do. If you don't dash, the Emperor began as he clenched his extended hand into a fist, then I will kill them all. I will raise this planet till only the dust remains, and then you'll have no choice but to return with grief rather than joy. It will hurt me more than it will hurt you, but it will be necessary. The Emperor spread his arms. So choose. Are you coming willingly, or do I have to take you with me kicking and screaming? Either way you're coming with, after all, don't forget, you made me the strongest. The shattered fragments of Maharagas will fell to the ground, each piece dissolving into motes of light as they touched the earth. The Emperor stood triumphant, palm open as the last glittering remnants slipped through his fingers. There, Emperor Mark declared, satisfaction evident in his voice. Whatever you were planning has failed. Sukuna's expression darkened, rage building behind his eyes as he watched years of careful preparation seemingly destroyed in an instant. The Emperor extended his hand, his face softening despite the tear streaks still visible on his cheeks. Come back with me, he said, his tone gentler now. You have nothing left you can do. His extended hand clenched into a fist. If you don't, then I will kill them all. I will raise this planet till only dust remains, and then you'll have no choice but to return with grief rather than joy. It will hurt me more than it will hurt you, but it will be necessary. The Emperor spread his arms, his eyes burning with imperial resolve. So choose. Are you coming willingly, or do I have to take you with me kicking and screaming? Either way you're coming with, after all, don't forget you made me the strongest. The tension in the air was palpable, the dimensional energy in the sky pulsing with increasing intensity as if responding to the confrontation below. Eve stood frozen, her powers ready but virtually useless against an opponent of Emperor Mark's level. Before Sukuna could respond, the air behind Emperor Mark distorted. A massive beam of purple energy, hollow purple, tore through space itself, aimed directly at the Emperor's back. Sukuna reacted instantly, grabbing Eve and launching them both backward. Emperor Mark sensed the attack at the last moment, turning to face it with narrowed eyes. Rather than dodging, he extended his hand, catching the devastating technique in his palm. For a brief moment, the purple energy struggled against his grip, threatening to overwhelm even his Viltrumite durability. Then, with a flex of his fingers and a pulse of strength that created a visible shockwave, Emperor Mark crushed the technique. The compressed energy exploded outward in a brilliant flash, leaving the Emperor unharmed but visibly irritated. Who dares? He demanded, scanning the surroundings for the source of the attack. His answer came in the form of a massive spectral beast soaring overhead its body crackling with electricity as it carried a familiar figure on its back. Yakuna stood tall atop his Shikigami, his expression cold and calculating as he gazed down at the confrontation. I believe I do, Yakuna replied. I find myself with a particular interest in this situation. Emperor Mark's eyes narrowed. You again. You didn't think our last encounter would be our final one, did you? Yakuna replied, smirk, directing Nu to descend until he stood a safe distance from the Emperor. I've decided to join forces with my counterpart against you. I already have a bone to pick with you after our earlier encounter, and I'd rather see another version of myself, no matter how compromised by humanity, triumph over an arrogant fool who thinks he can cage and possess a variation of me. Emperor Mark's laugh was cold. 2 against 1? You think that improves your odds? 3 against 1 isn't fair, a new voice called out. All heads turned to see Mohawk Mark landing with casual grace on a nearby pile of rubble, his spiked hair and modified costume making him instantly recognizable. But then again, who gives a shit about fair? He wasn't alone. Behind him, descending from the rippling sky, came 4 more variants. Astronaut Mark with his tactical precision, Sinister Mark with his cold cruelty, Viltrumite Mark with his imperial bearing, and Dark Mark with his haunted eyes partially hidden beneath his hood. The Emperor requires assistance, Astronaut Mark announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. And we've decided to provide it. The situation grew more complex as additional figures appeared from the opposite direction, Original Mark and Alternate Mark, accompanied by Nolan and Original Eve. They landed in formation, creating a standoff across the devastated commercial district. No one's taking Megumi anywhere against his will, Alternate Mark declared, his stance mirroring his father's beside him. For a moment, everyone stood frozen as they readied themselves for battle. Then Emperor Mark moved, a blur of motion as he launched himself towards Sukuna once more. Yakuna intercepted, a wall of cursed energy manifesting between them. The collision created a shockwave that sent debris flying in all directions, signaling the start of a battle that would reshape the devastated landscape. Chaos erupted as the various marks engaged each other, the air filling with sonic booms and the crash of impacts powerful enough to shatter concrete. Original Mark and alternate Mark fought back-to-back against Mohawk Mark and Sinister Mark, their coordinated movements suggesting a growing partnership despite their different backgrounds. Nolan faced off against Viltrumite Mark. Original Eve and alternate Eve found themselves defending against astronaut Marks, their molecular powers combining to create barriers and counterattacks. Dark Mark hung back, his movements hesitant, his eyes tracking the battle with an expression that suggested internal conflict rather than bloodlust. Amid this chaos, Sukuna turned to alternate Eve, who as well tried to help him. "You need to focus on joining the others," he instructed, his voice carrying that unmistakable authority. "I'm not leaving you," she protested, pink energy swirling around her hands. "You'll only distract me," Sukuna replied, his tone softening slightly despite the urgency. "And against opponents of this caliber, distraction means defeat." She wanted to argue, but the truth in his words was undeniable. With a reluctant nod, she stopped to assist him and focused on assisting the others. Yakuna guided Nu closer to Sukuna, the two versions of the King of Curses standing side by side as they faced Emperor Mark, who had disengaged from his initial assault and now hovered above them, cape billowing in the air. "Do you have a plan?" Yakuna asked, his voice low enough that only Sukuna could hear. "Of course," Sukuna replied without taking his eyes off the Emperor. "I would be a fool not to." "Care to share it?" Yakuna pressed. "Maharaga's adaptation should be complete," Sukuna explained. "But the final integration was disrupted when the wheel was shattered. I need time to complete the process." Yakuna laughed, a cold, amused sound. "Fine. I'll buy you the time you need. Do what you must." Sukuna raised an eyebrow, studying his counterpart with newfound curiosity. "You're surprisingly supportive. Aren't you concerned that my plan might result in the elimination of all other variations, including yourself?" Yakuna scoffed. "I'm not fool enough to come without my own contingencies. Besides," he added with a dismissive glance, "you're too soft a version of me to execute such a ruthless strategy. Normally, I'd find that disgusting, but in this case, it works to my benefit." Before Sukuna could respond, Emperor Mark attacked again, this time targeting Yakuna directly. The two engaged in a brutal exchange, cursed energy clashing against Viltrumite's strength in a display that lit up the night sky. Sukuna used the distraction to focus inward, gathering the scattered fragments of Maharaga's adaptation that remained within him. Though the wheel had been destroyed, its purpose had been largely fulfilled. The Divine General had spent a long time studying the dimensional energies, the various Sukunas, and most importantly, the mechanics of the merger itself. The plan had always been multifaceted, with contingencies built upon contingencies. The first step had been completed when he defeated Heian Sukuna without using cursed energy, a binding vow of immense difficulty that granted him proportionate power in return. This had allowed him to extract and seal Heian Sukuna's cursed energy into 20 fingers, just as he himself had once been sealed. The second step involved Maharaga's adaptation to the constraints Heaven had placed upon his binding vow capabilities. As the first son of Heaven, albeit fallen, Sukuna's connection to the divine realm was complex. Heaven did not wish to sever its ties with him completely, limiting what he could sacrifice through binding vows. But Maharaga, with its ability to adapt to any phenomenon, had gradually developed a countermeasure, a temporary window during which Sukuna could circumvent these limitations. Now, as the battle raged around him, Sukuna prepared for the third and most crucial step. He gathered his cursed energy, focusing it. Yakuna was thrown backward by a particularly devastating blow from Emperor Mark, crashing through the remains of a building before recovering with remarkable resilience. "Whatever you're planning," he called to Sukuna, "do it quickly. This one is stronger than he looks." Emperor Mark turned his attention back to Sukuna, his expression a complex mixture of determination and desperation. "It's over, Megumi," he declared. "Whatever trick you're attempting won't change the outcome. You're coming home with me." "No," Sukuna replied simply. "I'm sending everyone home." With that, He initiated the binding vow, the most powerful he had ever attempted. In exchange for his cursed energy and his source of it, his status as the son of heaven coming from them, and his connection to the binding vow system itself, he would reverse the merger's destructive effect, returning all variations to their original world before the dimensional collapse began. Under normal circumstances, such a vow would be impossible. Even sacrificing something as fundamental as his cursed energy and binding vow capabilities would not provide enough power to affect reality on such a scale. But Sukuna had found a loophole, by sacrificing not just these abilities themselves but all the potential future applications of them. For there was much one could gain by sacrificing the binding vow system. He could be cruel and let the merger happen, survive and with it gain power that would be enough to dominate the universe, but he isn't. And that in itself is a sacrifice. Not that he never planned this, to gain abilities from it that is, for since he got Maharaga he has been trying this approach, it only recently finally succeeding. The air around him began to shimmer as the binding vow took effect. The dimensional energy in the sky responded, the green ripples shifting and changing pattern as they reacted to the new force being introduced into the system. "What are you doing?" Emperor Mark demanded, sensing the change. "Stop this immediately." But it was too late. The binding vow had been sealed, the sacrifice accepted. Portals began to open throughout the battlefield, swirling vortices of energy, each one tuned to a specific dimension, a specific reality. "No!" Emperor Mark roared, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You can't do this. You can't send me back without you." He launched himself at Sukuna with desperate speed, but Yakuna intercepted once more, buying precious seconds as the portals continued to form and stabilize. The various marks fighting across the devastated district began to feel the pull of their native dimensions. Mohawk Mark cursed as he was dragged toward one of the portals, his attempts to resist proving futile against the metaphysical force. "This isn't over," he shouted as he disappeared into the swirling energy. One by one, the variants were pulled toward their respective portals. Astronaut Mark went with dignity, offering a salute to his opponents before stepping through voluntarily. Sinister Mark fought to the last, his fingers leaving gouges in the concrete as he was dragged away. Viltrumite Mark, engaged in combat with Nolan, found himself suddenly pulled backward. "This changes nothing," he declared. "The Empire endures, with or without you." Dark Mark, who had remained on the periphery of the battle, approached his portal with what might have been sorrow and relief, disappearing without resistance. Yakuna, still battling Emperor Mark, felt the pull of his own dimension. He disengaged, allowing himself to be drawn toward the portal that had formed for him. "This isn't over, Emperor," he called, his laughter echoing across the battlefield. "One day, I'll find you and settle the score." With that, he vanished into the swirling energy, leaving Emperor Mark alone against Sukuna. The Emperor turned to Sukuna, rage and desperation warring in his expression. "I won't go back without you," he declared. "I can't." He charged forward, but this time Sukuna didn't attempt to evade. Instead, he stood his ground, focusing on maintaining the binding vow as it continued to reverse the merger. Emperor Mark seized him by the shoulders, his grip powerful but not crushing. "Please," he begged, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. Don't send me back to a world without you in it." "Mark!" a voice called from behind them. Both turned to see a woman hovering near one of the portals, Emperor Universe Eve. Her expression was a mixture of shock, joy, and determination as she gazed at Sukuna. "Megumi," she whispered, clearly struggling to believe what she was seeing. "Is it really you?" Emperor Mark's grip on Sukuna tightened. "Eve, help me bring him back." Understanding flashed across her face, followed by resolve. She flew toward them, her powers already reaching out to envelop Sukuna in a molecular field that would allow her to transport him. Alternate Eve saw what was happening and launched herself forward. "No!" she shouted, her own pink energy colliding with her counterparts. "You can't take him." The two Eves engaged in a brief but intense battle, their powers evenly matched despite Emperor Eve's greater experience. In the confusion, Emperor Mark began dragging Sukuna toward the portal to his dimension. Alternate Mark saw what was happening and rushed to intervene. "Let him go," he demanded, grabbing Emperor Mark's cape and pulling with all his strength. The Emperor didn't release his grip on Sukuna, and as the portal's pull intensified, all four found themselves being drawn inexorably toward it, Emperor Mark refusing to release Sukuna, alternate Eve trying to pull Sukuna free, alternate Mark trying to stop the Emperor. "No!" Original Mark shouted, seeing what was happening. He launched himself toward them, but it was too late. With a final surge of energy, the portal expanded, enveloping Emperor Mark, Sukuna, alternate Eve, and alternate Mark. The last thing Original Mark saw was his counterpart's desperate expression before the portal collapsed, leaving behind only empty space where the four had been. The remaining portals began to close one by one, the dimensional energy in the sky gradually stabilizing as the merger reversed itself. Original Mark, Original Eve, Nolan, and the others found themselves standing in the devastated commercial district, now eerily quiet after the chaos of battle. "They're gone," Original Eve said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "All of them." "Not gone," Nolan corrected, his tactical mind already analyzing what had happened. "Returned to their proper dimensions. Except our Mark and Eve went with the Emperor," Original Mark finished, his expression grim. "And Megumi too." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Their friends and counterparts were now trapped in another dimension, the domain of a being with the power to conquer 17 galaxies, a being obsessed with possessing Megumi at any cost. In another reality, in the grand throne room of the Viltrumite Empire's central palace, a portal opened with a sound like tearing fabric. Four figures tumbled through, landing on the polished marble floor as the dimensional gateway closed behind them. Emperor Mark recovered first, rising to his feet with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command. His eyes immediately found Sukuna, who lay unconscious nearby, the strain of the binding vow having finally overwhelmed even his enhanced physiology. Alternate Eve and alternate Mark were also unconscious, the journey between dimensions having taken a greater toll on them than on the Emperor, who was accustomed to cosmic travel. Emperor Eve rushed forward from where she had been waiting, having returned through her own portal moments earlier. "Megumi," she breathed, kneeling beside his still form, her fingers gently brushing hair from his face. "After all this time." Emperor Mark stood over them, relief and joy washing away the rage and desperation that had consumed him during the battle. "Welcome back," he said softly as Sukuna's eyes began to flutter open. "Welcome home." The binding vow had succeeded, the merger had been reversed, the dimensions separated once more. But in his careful wording of the vow, Sukuna had created an unexpected outcome. He had sacrificed his cursed energy and binding vow capabilities to reverse the merger and return all variations to their original dimensions. But he had never specified which dimension he himself would return to. He couldn't, it was too much already what was gained. He couldn't risk not having the enough power. And now, as consciousness slowly returned, Sukuna found himself in the heart of the Viltrumite Empire, with the Emperor standing triumphant above him, and no immediate way to return to the world he had come to call home. Back in the original dimension, as dawn broke over the devastated city, the green energy in the sky had completely disappeared, leaving only the familiar blue of Earth's atmosphere. The merger had been reversed, reality restored to its proper configuration. But for those left behind, a new mission had already begun to form, finding a way to rescue their friends from a dimension ruled by an emperor who would never willingly let them go. Original Mark stared up at the sky, determination hardening his features. "We'll find them," he promised. "Somehow, we'll find a way to bring them back." Beside him, Original Eve nodded, already calculating possibilities. "If Sukuna could create portals between dimensions once, we can find a way to do it again." Nolan placed a hand on his alternate son's shoulder. "It won't be easy," he cautioned. "But you're right. We'll find a way." As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the ruins of what had once been a battlefield between realities, they turned and began the long walk back to what remained of the GDA facility. They had a rescue to plan, a team to assemble, and a dimension to breach. The Invincible war might be over, but a new conflict was just beginning. In the vast throne room of the Viltrumite Empire, Emperor Mark watched as medical staff attended to the still unconscious forms of alternate Mark and alternate Eve. His attention, however, remained fixed on Sukuna, who had regained consciousness but remained silent, his expression unreadable as he took in his surroundings. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Emperor Mark said softly, kneeling beside him. "But in time, you'll see that this is where you belong. With me. With Eve. With the empire we built together." Emperor World Eve stood nearby, her eyes never leaving Sukuna's face, drinking in every detail as if afraid he might disappear again. "We've waited so long," she whispered. 17 years of emptiness, of preserving your vision, your memory." Sukuna's gaze shifted between them, calculating, assessing. The binding vow had cost him his cursed energy, temporarily, at least. The 20 fingers of Heian Sukuna remained sealed within his body, a resource he had deliberately preserved through careful wording of the vow. Soon, when he is alone, he could instantly extract that energy, gain a new source of CE from it, restore his powers. But for now, needing to keep the illusion of weakness, he must appear to remain weakened, in an unfamiliar dimension, wary as is expected of him in being surrounded by beings of immense power who had no intention of letting him go. "Rest," Emperor Mark urged, misinterpreting his silence as exhaustion rather than strategic assessment. "We have all the time in the world now. The Empire awaits its architect's return." As medical staff helped Sukuna to a recovery chamber, he caught sight of alternate Mark and alternate Eve being taken to separate rooms. He gritted his teeth but kept himself controlled. For now, Sukuna would wait. Observe. Plan. The game had changed, the board reset. New pieces, new rules, new strategies required. The Emperor had won this round, but the King of Curses was far from defeated. After all, he had faced worse odds before and emerged victorious. This would be no different. Just another challenge for the one who had transcended death itself. Hello everyone, just to clarify again, since some things appear to be misunderstood. The 20 fingers he got from Heian Sukuna are in his body. He just needs to instantly want to regain his CE, and then he's back at full strength. He wishes to maintain illusion of weakness for now to see what to do in this unfamiliar world and be underestimated. As for the binding vow system, it is gone, for now that it. As made sure of in the vow, nothing sacrificed was sacrificed permanently. Since we have the cheat code Maharaga, the most awesome general ever, it will simply take a lot of time for the link to be established again. I won't specify yet how much. So yeah, hope this clarified everything, see ya. The recovery chamber was luxurious despite its medical purpose. Sukuna lay on a bed that seemed to conform perfectly to his body, the material adapting to his every movement with subtle precision. The walls glowed with a soft, ambient light that adjusted automatically to his comfort level, and the temperature remained at an ideal balance regardless of how he shifted. But despite these comforts, Sukuna remained alert, his smart atoms requiring minimal rest compared to an ordinary human. More importantly, he didn't trust himself to be unconscious in this unfamiliar place, surrounded by potential threats disguised as allies. Emperor Mark had been insistent on him resting, clearly operating under the assumption that the binding vow had left him genuinely weakened. Sukuna had done nothing to correct this misconception, for he had already regained his full power. Let them believe him vulnerable. It would only make his eventual moves more effective. His mind worked methodically, cataloging everything he'd observed since arriving in this dimension. The palace architecture suggested a blend of Viltrumite aesthetics with human influences. Emperor Mark's attempt to merge his heritage with the design sensibilities Megumi had apparently preferred. The staff moved with military precision, their eyes always downcast in the presence of the Emperor, some stealing curious glances, while others reverent at Sukuna when they thought he wasn't looking. And then there were the paintings, massive murals depicting Emperor Mark's conquests across the galaxy, always with two figures at his side, this world's Emperor Eve, and a young man with Sukuna's face but a very different bearing. The Megumi of this world, the architect of an empire spanning 17 galaxies. The contradiction was fascinating. This Megumi had apparently been a strategic genius who helped shape a galactic empire, yet he'd been killed by Nolan Grayson, a being who, while powerful, was hardly invincible. It suggested a vulnerability, a weakness that Sukuna himself had long since overcome. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside his chamber. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy falling, guards shouting orders that were being summarily ignored. Sukuna tensed, his body automatically preparing for potential conflict despite his outward appearance of weakness. The doors to his chamber burst open with enough force to dent the metal frame, and a figure stormed in, tall, powerfully built, with features that struck Sukuna with unexpected familiarity. "Megumi!" the man shouted, his voice raw with emotion. "My son." Sukuna's eyes narrowed as he focused past his initial shock to study the intruder. The face, he knew that face. It had stared back at him from photographs in Uncle Kenji's house, from family albums he'd examined during quiet moments of curiosity about the body he now inhabited. Toji Fushiguro, Uncle Kenji's brother. His father. Or rather, Megumi's father. The man who, in his original timeline, had been dead. The man in the Jujutsu timeline had sold his son to the Zenin clan and disappeared, only to die years later during Gojo's youth. Yet here he stood, very much alive and radiating a mixture of desperate joy and barely contained violence as he approached the bed. "They told me you were back," Toji continued, his voice rough with emotion. "That Mark had found you in another dimension. I didn't believe it until Dashi broke off, his eyes drinking in every detail of Sukuna's face. "It's really you." Before Sukuna could respond, the chamber shook as Emperor Mark flew in through the same doors, stopping abruptly when he saw who had entered. His initial expression of alarm shifted to something more complex, resignation tinged with annoyance. "Toji," Emperor Mark acknowledged, his imperial bearing momentarily replaced by the wariness of someone dealing with an unpredictable force. "This is why I didn't immediately tell you. I wanted to give Megumi time to recover before Dash. That would have just made my reaction more explosive," Toji interrupted, not bothering to look at the Emperor as he moved closer to Sukuna's bedside. "Nothing will keep me from my son. Not even you, Your Majesty." The title was delivered with a sarcasm that bordered on insubordination, yet Emperor Mark seemed to accept it with resigned tolerance. There was history here, Sukuna realized. A complex relationship between two men who clearly didn't like each other but had been forced to coexist for years. "Megumi needs rest," Emperor Mark insisted, his voice taking on that imperial edge once more. "The dimensional transition was taxing, and Dash'll be the judge of what my son needs." Toji cut him off again, finally turning to face the Emperor. The tension between them was palpable, two apex predators circling the same territory. "You've had your reunion. Now it's my turn." Emperor Mark's jaw tightened, but surprisingly, he didn't press the issue. 10 minutes, he conceded. Then the medical staff need to complete their evaluation. With that, he turned and exited the chamber, though Sukuna noted he didn't go far, hovering just outside the doorway, within earshot but giving the illusion of privacy. Toji waited until the Emperor had withdrawn before turning back to Sukuna, his expression softening as he pulled a chair closer to the bed. "You look good," he said, studying Sukuna's face with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "Different, but good. Stronger than I remember." Sukuna remained silent, assessing the situation. This was an unexpected development, one that could either complicate his plans or provide an unforeseen advantage. Either way, he needed more information before deciding how to respond. "Not talking, huh?" Toji continued, a hint of familiar disappointment creeping into his voice. "Some things never change. You always did get quiet when you were processing something big." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know this must be strange for you. Mark says you don't remember this world, that you've been living a completely different life in another dimension. That true?" Sukuna decided on a measured response. "My experiences have been different," he acknowledged, keeping his tone neutral. Toji nodded as if this confirmed something. "Different how? Did you have a father in that world too? Was he better than me?" The question caught Sukuna off guard. There was vulnerability beneath the gruffness, a hint of genuine fear that the alternate reality might have provided Megumi with a superior parent. "I had an uncle," Sukuna replied carefully. "Kenji Fushiguro. Your brother." Toji's eyes widened. "Kenji? That soft-hearted fool raised you." He barked out a laugh that seemed to contain equal parts amusement and disbelief. "Well, that explains the politeness, at least. Always was too proper for his own good." He studied Sukuna more closely. "But you're not soft. I can see that much. There's something in your eyes that's harder than I remember. Sharper. A hint of pride entered his voice. Good. The universe isn't kind to the soft. The last part, though, he stated with a dark look in his eyes, a hidden rage. Sukuna guessed he was remembering the death of his world's Megumi. Sukuna remained silent, allowing Toji to continue. Every word provided more information, more context for the strange new reality he found himself in. You know, when Mark told me he was going to find you in another dimension, I thought he'd finally lost what was left of his mind, Toji said, leaning back in his chair. 17 years of obsession, and suddenly he claims there's a way to bring you back? It sounded like the desperate fantasy of a man who couldn't let go. His expression darkened. But then I remembered what you always said about the multiverse. About infinite possibilities existing simultaneously. You used to lecture me about it when you were just a kid, theories way beyond what a child should understand. He shook his head, a mixture of bewilderment and pride in his expression. Always were too smart for your own good. Guess you were right all along. The conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock at the door. A medical attendant entered, clearly nervous about interrupting but determined to fulfill their duties. Forgive the intrusion, they said, bowing deeply. But His Imperial Majesty insists that the evaluation proceed now. Toji's expression hardened, but he nodded reluctantly. Fine. But I'll be back later. He turned to Sukuna, his voice softening once more. We have a lot to catch up on, son. He stood, hesitated for a moment as if considering something, then reached out and briefly squeezed Sukuna's shoulder, a gesture so unexpected that Sukuna had to consciously prevent himself from reacting defensively. Rest up, Toji said. And don't let them push you around too much. Emperor or not, Mark doesn't own you. With that, he strode from the room, his posture challenging as he passed Emperor Mark in the doorway. The two exchanged a look loaded with unspoken tension before Toji disappeared down the corridor. Emperor Mark entered once more, watching as the medical staff began their evaluation. I apologize for the interruption, he said, his voice carrying that strange mixture of imperial authority and personal warmth he seemed to reserve exclusively for Sukuna, this time forgoing his normal informality. Toji can be difficult to manage. He's alive, Sukuna observed, the statement carrying more weight than the Emperor could possibly understand. Yes, Emperor Mark confirmed, misinterpreting Sukuna's meaning. Despite his best efforts to get himself killed over the years, he's too valuable to the Empire to lose, though there have been times I've been tempted to execute him myself. A small, reminiscent smile touched his lips. You always did have a tempering effect on him. Even as a child, you could talk him down when no one else could get through. It was remarkable to watch this hardened assassin listening to his 12-year-old son's strategic advice. It seems in this world, unlike the one he was brought from, where he died in a car crash, Toji does have his heavenly restriction. The medical staff worked silently around them, scanning Sukuna with advanced technology that seemed to analyze his physical condition without requiring invasive procedures. Your father will want to spend more time with you, Emperor Mark continued. I've arranged for him to have access to your quarters once you're settled. I hope that's acceptable. It wasn't a question, despite being phrased as one. The Emperor was informing, not asking, maintaining the illusion of consideration while already having made the decision. Of course, Sukuna replied, his mind already calculating how to use this unexpected development to his advantage. Toji Fushiguro, alive, and clearly devoted to his son in a way that contradicted everything Sukuna knew about the man from his jujitsu counterpart. He knew little about him from his life as Megumi, the memories of that time too distant compared to his first and second life. Yet still, this is important. Toji is a wild card in this carefully controlled environment. A potential ally or a complication, depending on how Sukuna played the situation. As the medical staff completed their evaluation and began to withdraw, Emperor Mark moved closer to the bed. Once you're cleared, I'd like to show you the palace, he said, his voice taking on an almost childlike enthusiasm. Everything was built according to your original designs. The architecture, the layout, even the gardens. Eve oversaw the construction personally after what happened. His expression clouded momentarily. It won't be exactly as you remember, of course. We've made some adaptations over the years. But the essence is there, your vision, your influence in every detail. Sukuna nodded, maintaining his facade of weakened compliance while his mind continued to analyze and plan. The Emperor's obsession was both a weakness to exploit and a danger to navigate carefully. The intensity of his fixation meant he would be watching Sukuna closely, looking for any sign that Megumi was returning to his former self. "Rest now," Emperor Mark said, seemingly satisfied with Sukuna's passive acceptance. "Tomorrow, when you're stronger, we'll begin reintroducing you to the empire you helped create." As the Emperor finally withdrew, leaving Sukuna alone in the luxurious chamber, the King of Curses allowed himself a moment of genuine reflection. He could sense his Eve and Mark, they were fine. More than fine, even more rested and healthy than they have ever been. His child was also growing in an acceptable manner. Sukuna didn't know what to make of that. He was going to be a father. A true father, not merely in the spiritual sense as he was with Yuji, but one of his own in both body and soul. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. He, the King of Curses, was terrified of being a father, not because he feared the prospect or couldn't handle responsibility. Of course not, there was none more responsible than him, but because he already was feeling love toward the growing child. Could already feel the pulse of its soul. Yet, he did not know how to love such a fragile thing when in his second life as Sukuna. Such creatures were often collateral damage in his wars, in his conquests of the Heian-era's emperor's armies and territories. Sukuna quickly shook his head. He couldn't get too emotional right now. Those thoughts could wait for later. He was nothing if not an adapter. Now, back to the important parts of his situation. The appearance of Toji Fushiguro. It had been unexpected, a variable he hadn't accounted for in his initial assessment of this dimension. The man's presence complicated matters, adding another layer to the already complex situation. But complications could be advantages in disguise for those skilled enough to use them. And if there was one thing Sukuna excelled at, it was turning unexpected developments to his advantage. He closed his eyes, appearing to rest while his mind continued to work, planning his next moves in this dangerous new game. The Emperor had won the first round, bringing him to this dimension against his will. But the game was far from over. And the King of Curses was a very patient player indeed. The private chamber within the Imperial Palace was designed with both luxury and security in mind. Soft, ambient lighting illuminated walls of a material that resembled marble but was actually a specialized compound developed on Torlia Prime, capable of absorbing and neutralizing energy-based attacks. The furnishings were elegant yet practical, each piece positioned to provide both comfort and clear sightlines to all entrances. It was in this carefully designed space that Eve awoke, her consciousness returning in stages. First came awareness of the unfamiliar softness beneath her, then the subtle scent of something floral yet alien, and finally the realization that she was not alone. Her eyes snapped open, molecular energy immediately gathering around her hands as she bolted upright, ready to defend herself. "Easy," a familiar voice cautioned. "You're safe." Eve's gaze fixed on the speaker, and she found herself staring at herself. Or rather, a version of herself that was both recognizable and distinctly different. The woman sitting calmly in a chair beside the bed wore her face, but there was maturity to her features that spoke of additional years and harder experiences. Her hair was longer, elegantly styled, and she carried herself with a regal bearing that the Eve of Earth had never cultivated. "You," Eve said, her voice tight with tension. "Emperor World's Eve." The woman inclined her head slightly. "I prefer Atom Eve, actually. It's what I've always gone by, even after." She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. All this. Eve's molecular energy continued to swirl around her hands. "Where is Megumi? What have you done with him?" Atom Eve raised her hands in a placating gesture. "He's resting, recovering from the strain of the dimensional transition. You can sense him yourself. Your powers should be able to detect his molecular signature, even at this distance." Eve hesitated, then cautiously extended her awareness, searching for the familiar pattern that was uniquely Sukuna's. To her surprise, she found it almost immediately, strong, stable, and unmistakably alive, somewhere else in the massive structure. The relief that washed through her was so intense that her molecular control faltered momentarily, causing the energy around her hands to flicker. "He's unharmed," Atom Eve assured her. "Mark would never allow anything to hurt him. Neither would I." Eve's energy didn't dissipate completely, but it stabilized, no longer fluctuating with her emotions. "And Mark?" "My world's Mark. Also safe," Atom Eve confirmed. "In a separate wing, under guard but comfortable. Mark, our Mark, thought it best to keep you separated initially, to prevent any coordinated resistance." Eve's eyes narrowed. Smart of him, but unnecessary. I'm not leaving without Megumi, and Megumi isn't leaving without me. A small smile touched Atom Eve's lips. On that, at least, we agree. Though perhaps for different reasons. She rose gracefully and moved to a small table, where she poured 2 glasses of a pale blue liquid from an elegant carafe. "You should drink. The dimensional transition can be dehydrating, and your body needs to replenish." Eve eyed the offered glass suspiciously. "Is it poisoned?" Atom Eve sighed, taking a deliberate sip from her own glass before extending the other. "If I wanted you dead, you would be. I don't need poison for that." After a moment's hesitation, Eve accepted the glass, though she continued to analyze its molecular structure before taking a cautious sip. The liquid was cool and refreshing, with a subtle sweetness unlike anything she'd tasted on Earth. "It's called cerulean nectar," Atom Eve explained. "From the floating gardens of Altair 7. One of the few pleasures I've allowed myself over the years." Eve lowered the glass, studying her counterpart with scientific precision. "Why are you here? Why not let your emperor handle me?" "Because I thought you deserved to hear certain things from me directly," Atom Eve replied, returning to her chair. "Woman to woman. Scientist to scientist. Eve to Eve." She crossed her legs, her posture relaxed yet maintaining that subtle regality. "And because I believe you'll understand my perspective better than anyone else could. After all, in the most fundamental ways, we are the same person." "We're not the same," Eve countered immediately. "We've lived different lives, made different choices." "Have we?" Atom Eve asked, her head tilting slightly. "Or have we simply experienced different circumstances, while remaining fundamentally the same in our core nature?" She gestured between them. "We both fell in love with Megumi Fushiguro. We both recognized something extraordinary in him that captured us completely. We both devoted ourselves to understanding him on a molecular level, studying him with scientific precision while simultaneously being consumed by emotions that defy rational analysis." Eve wanted to argue but found herself unable to refute the observation. Instead, she changed tack. "You said you wanted to tell me certain things. What things?" Atom Eve's expression softened, a distant look entering her eyes. "I want to tell you about us. About Megumi and me, and Mark. About the life we shared before everything changed. I think you deserve to know who he was, who we were together, before you judge our determination to reclaim him." Eve hesitated, then nodded once, her curiosity temporarily overriding her wariness. "Tell me." Atom Eve's gaze grew distant, looking back through years of memories. "We met when we were children. I was the new girl at school, brilliant but socially awkward, more comfortable with molecules than with people. Mark was already popular, athletic, everyone's friend. And Megumi. Megumi was the quiet transfer student from Japan who somehow saw right through everyone's facades, including mine." A soft smile touched her lips. "The 3 of us became inseparable. Mark was the heart, I was the mind, and Megumi was the soul, the one who gave direction and purpose to our little trio. Even at 12 years old, he had this gravity to him. This quiet certainty about how the world worked and how it could be better." She took another sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving Eve's face. "We grew up together, navigating the typical teenage dramas, but always with this sense that we were meant for something more. When Mark's powers manifested, Megumi was the first person he told, before his parents, before me. And Megumi's response was to immediately start developing training protocols, strategic applications, ethical frameworks for how such power should be used. That sounds like him, Eve acknowledged quietly. Eve nodded. By the time we were 16, I knew I was in love with him. I tried to hide it, worried about ruining our friendship, about making things awkward with Mark. But Megumi, being Megumi, had already figured it out. Her expression grew fond at the memory. He approached me in the lab one day. I was working on a molecular stabilization experiment. Without preamble, he said, "Your pulse accelerates by approximately 12.3% when I enter a room. Your pupils dilate, and you demonstrate increased clumsiness despite your normally precise motor control. These are classic physiological indicators of attraction." Despite herself, Eve laughed. That's very him. Especially recently, isn't it? Eve agreed, her own laughter joining Eve's for a brief moment. So clinical, so matter-of-fact. And then he simply said, "I find these responses mutually satisfactory and propose we explore their implications further." His version of asking me out. Her expression softened. We were together from that moment on. Through high school, through the revelation of Mark's Viltrumite heritage, through the discovery that Nolan was not the hero Earth believed him to be. Megumi was. He was simply always there, always 3 steps ahead, always seeing patterns the rest of us missed. She rose again, moving to the window that overlooked the imperial capital, a breathtaking vista of crystalline spires and elegant bridges, with ships of various designs moving through designated aerial lanes. When Nolan offered to take us to Viltrum, to show Mark his heritage, Megumi insisted on coming along. He said he didn't trust Nolan's motivations, that there were inconsistencies in his behavior that suggested hidden agendas. We didn't fully understand his concerns then, but we trusted his judgment. Eve's voice took on a harder edge. He was right, of course. Nolan had been sent to evaluate Earth for conquest, to prepare it for Viltrumite occupation. But what none of us anticipated was how Megumi's brilliance would impact the Viltrumite High Council. She turned back to Eve. Can you imagine it? A human boy, barely 12, walking into the most powerful governing body in the galaxy, and telling them their conquest strategy was inefficient? That he had a better way. Despite the tension of the situation, Eve found herself smiling at the image. It was so perfectly in character for the Megumi she knew, that absolute confidence, that dismissal of conventional power structures in favor of pure strategic efficiency. They were going to kill him on the spot, Eve continued. But then he outlined a plan that would reduce their casualties by 60% while increasing territorial gains. Even Thrag couldn't argue with those numbers. She returned to her seat, her expression growing more animated as she recounted their shared history. After that, Megumi became integral to Viltrumite strategic planning. The council members hated it, a human child advising the Empire? But the results spoke for themselves. And as we grew older, his influence only expanded. Her eyes met Eve's directly. We were engaged when he was 19. It wasn't a grand romantic proposal. That wasn't his style. We were reviewing the architectural plans for what would eventually become this palace, and he simply said, this would function more efficiently if we shared living quarters permanently. A formalized partnership would simplify administrative processes. Eve couldn't help but laugh again. He proposed by citing administrative efficiency? He did, Eve confirmed, her own smile widening. And I understood exactly what he meant. That was always our language, precision and efficiency as expressions of deeper emotions neither of us was entirely comfortable articulating directly. Her smile faded slowly. We were to be married 3 months later. The ceremony was planned, the arrangements made. I was. Her voice caught slightly, and she paused, collecting herself. I was 4 months pregnant with our child. Eve's breath caught, the revelation hitting her with unexpected force. You were pregnant? Eve nodded, her composure wavering for the first time. We had worked for years to make it possible. My molecular powers had always affected my reproductive system, an unintended consequence of my abilities. Megumi helped me develop specialized blockers, more sophisticated than the mental controls I'd used since childhood. He was meticulous in his research, determined to find a solution. Her hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, a gesture of remembered loss. When we finally succeeded, he was different. Still Megumi, still precise and methodical in everything, but there was a new softness to him. He would talk to the baby at night, explaining complex theoretical concepts in that serious voice of his, as if our unborn child needed to understand quantum mechanics and strategic theory from the womb. A ghost of a smile touched her lips at the memory, though her eyes remained shadowed with grief. And then Nolan happened. Eve felt a chill run through her at the sudden darkness in Atom Eve's voice. "He killed Megumi," she said softly, not a question but a statement of empathy. "To teach Mark a lesson in detachment," Atom Eve confirmed, her voice hardening. "To show him that humans were beneath Viltrumites, that no human should have influence over their kind." She looked down at her hands, which had clenched into fists in her lap. "I was there. I watched it happen." Nolan stabbed him in the heart with such casual disdain, as if he were discarding something worthless rather than destroying the most brilliant mind of our generation. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I held him as he died." His last words were about the baby, instructions for prenatal care, contingency plans for possible complications. Even dying, he was thinking 3 steps ahead, trying to protect us. Eve felt tears forming in her own eyes, the scientist in her temporarily overwhelmed by the sheer human tragedy of the story. The baby. "I lost her that same day," Atom Eve said, her voice hollow with remembered pain. "The shock, the stress, the grief. My body couldn't maintain the pregnancy. The blockers we developed were sophisticated, but they weren't designed to withstand that kind of trauma." She looked up, meeting Eve's gaze directly. "It was the only reason I didn't tear the palace apart molecule by molecule in that moment. The only reason I didn't try to kill Nolan on the spot, suicidal as that would have been. I was focused entirely on trying to save our child, using every bit of my molecular control to maintain the pregnancy. But it wasn't enough." Eve swallowed hard, finding herself at a loss for words in the face of such profound loss. "I'm so sorry," she finally managed, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "In a single day, I lost everything," Atom Eve continued, her voice gaining strength again. "My fiancé, our child, our future together. All of it, gone in an instant of Viltrumite cruelty." Her expression hardened with resolve. "But I refused to let his legacy die with him. In that moment, as I lost both Megumi and our child, I made a promise that I would preserve everything he had built, everything he had envisioned. That his death would not be the end of his story." Eve nodded, understanding dawning. "That's why you stayed with Mark, why you helped him build the Empire." "Mark was as devastated as I was," Atom Eve confirmed. "When he found us in the garden, me cradling Megumi's body, already bleeding from the miscarriage, something in him simply broke. He killed his father without hesitation, without mercy. Punched straight through his chest before Nolan even realized what was happening. Just like the way he killed Megumi," she shook her head slightly, remembering. "The Empire fractured after that. Half supported Mark's actions, viewing Nolan's murder of Megumi as treason against the Empire itself. The other half saw it as justifiable discipline of an uppity human. Civil war followed, with Mark eventually emerging as Emperor." "And you stood by him," Eve observed. "We stood by each other," Atom Eve corrected. "United in grief, in rage, in determination to build the empire Megumi had envisioned. To ensure his death meant something." She leaned forward, her intensity growing. "For 17 years, I've kept that promise. Helped Mark build the empire Megumi designed. Maintained his principles, his vision. Never sought comfort in anyone else's arms, not even for a moment. Never allowed myself to form emotional attachments that might dilute my devotion to his memory." Her eyes took on a fierce light. "And all the while, I studied dimensional theory. I researched the multiverse, the possibilities of alternate realities where there might be a way to revive him. I never stopped believing that somehow, someday, I would find him again." Eve set down her glass, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her scientific composure. "Why are you telling me all this?" Atom Eve's gaze was steady, unflinching. Because you're pregnant with his child. The words hit Eve like a physical blow. What? You're pregnant, Eve repeated calmly. About 3 weeks along, I'd estimate, though that may be wrong, since you are special, and the child could simply be developing too fast. The molecular changes are subtle but unmistakable to someone with our level of perception. Eve's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen, her powers immediately focusing inward to analyze her own cellular structure. And there it was, a small cluster of cells already developing, already containing the unique genetic signature that combined her DNA with Sukuna's. I didn't know, she whispered, genuinely shocked. How did you dash? I've been studying human reproduction at the molecular level for decades, Eve explained. Particularly as it relates to enhanced beings. The signs are clear to me, though they might not have been noticeable to you yet, especially given the chaos of recent events. Eve's mind raced, processing this new information with scientific precision, even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. A child. Sukuna's child. Growing within her at this very moment. I'm not surprised by it, Eve continued. You are the peak specimen of women, and Megumi, especially Megumi as he is now, with his evolution in power, is the peak of male specimens. The compatibility between you is exceptional. She paused, something vulnerable entering her expression. And he has fallen in love with you. That much is clear, even to me. Eve's head snapped up. You're wrong. Megumi, my Megumi, isn't the same as yours. A being with a different soul, different experiences. No, Eve interrupted firmly. I know what I see. The soul is the same, regardless of the name or the experiences. She rose again, pacing with elegant precision. But that isn't my point. My point is that I will get Megumi back in my life, and you must accept that. Eve's molecular energy flared defensively. If you think I'm just going to step aside, that isn't what I'm saying, Eve cut in, her own energy responding but remaining controlled. Initially, during the merger, there was a simpler solution. If you had died and I had remained, things would have been uncomplicated. But now, the situation is more complex. Her expression hardened. Megumi does not tolerate betrayal. If I were to kill you, especially now that you carry his child, he would not forgive me. He might even kill me in retribution, and I don't know that I would stop him, because the thought of him hating me is more abhorrent than death itself. Eve stared at her counterpart, recognizing the truth in her words. This was not a threat but a statement of fact, an analysis as clinical and precise as any scientific observation. So, Eve continued, you must accept that from now on, I will do everything in my power to make Megumi remember who he was, who we were together. I will be with him again. If you wish to remain by his side, that is your choice, and I will accept it. I will even share him, if that is what he desires. Her eyes met Eve's with unwavering intensity. But I will not let him go again. Not after 17 years of emptiness. Not after losing him and our child. Not after finally finding him across the dimensions. Eve's mind worked rapidly, analyzing the situation from every angle. This woman before her was not evil, not in any conventional sense. She was simply herself, shaped by different circumstances, driven by the same fundamental devotion to the same being. And now there was the added dimension of shared motherhood, one who had lost a child, and one who was just beginning the journey of creating new life. And if he chooses me? Eve asked quietly. If, despite your efforts, he remembers nothing of your shared past and wants only the life he's built with me? Eve's expression flickered with pain, but her resolve remained unshaken. Then I will accept his choice, while continuing to hope that in time, his memories might return. But I don't believe that will happen. The connection we shared was too profound, too fundamental to who we both are. She moved closer, her energy field brushing against Eve's, not aggressively, but in a gesture almost like recognition. We, again, are more alike than different, you and I. We both love the same man with an intensity that defies conventional rational explanation. We both have devoted ourselves to understanding him, to protecting him, to standing beside him against whatever threats arise. Her voice softened. Is it so unthinkable that we might find a way to coexist? To share in his life, rather than forcing him to choose between us? Eve's immediate instinct was to reject the suggestion outright. The thought of sharing Sukuna with anyone, even another version of herself, triggered a possessive response so intense that the molecules in the air around her began to vibrate visibly. But beneath that initial reaction, her analytical mind continued to work, examining the situation from all angles. This woman had loved and lost the same being Eve herself had only recently found. She had preserved his memory, his vision, for 17 years without wavering in her devotion. She had lost a child, their child, in circumstances of unimaginable trauma. And now, Eve herself carried a new life within her, a child who would need both stability and protection in a universe far more dangerous than Earth had ever been. "I need time," Eve said finally. "Time to process all of this. Time to speak with Megumi." Eve nodded, accepting this response. "Of course. But understand that time is something we have in abundance here. Mark rules 17 galaxies. We have resources, technology, and lifespans that extend far beyond what you knew on Earth. This is not a decision that needs to be rushed." She moved toward the door, pausing before she reached it. "You'll be given freedom to move within certain areas of the palace, once you've recovered fully. I've arranged for a complete wardrobe and personal items to be delivered. If there's anything specific you require for your pregnancy, you need only ask." The mention of her pregnancy, still so new, so shocking, sent another wave of emotion through Eve. Her hand moved protectively to her abdomen, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by her counterpart. "I lost my chance to be a mother," Eve said softly. "I won't interfere with your opportunity. Whatever happens between us, between you and Megumi, I want you to know that your child will be protected and cherished in this empire. That is a promise I make without condition or expectation." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and Eve found herself nodding in acknowledgement of this unexpected pledge. As Eve reached for the door, a final thought occurred to Eve. "The child you lost, was it a boy or a girl?" Eve paused, her hand on the door. "A girl," she said softly. "We had already chosen her name, Shinobu." It was one of the few times Megumi ever referenced his Japanese heritage directly. He said it represented both beauty and resilience, qualities he hoped our daughter would embody. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Perhaps that's another reason why the universe brought us all together now. A second chance, not just for me and Megumi, but for the family we lost before it could truly begin." With that, she exited the chamber, leaving Eve alone with her thoughts, her hand still resting protectively over her abdomen where a new life, impossibly miraculously, had already begun to grow. Consciousness returned to Mark gradually, a slow awareness of unfamiliar surroundings filtering through the haze of disorientation. The room was spacious yet somehow intimate, designed with both luxury and security in mind. The lighting was soft, ambient, emanating from hidden sources that cast no shadows. The air carried a subtle scent, clean, slightly metallic, nothing like Earth. As his vision cleared, Mark realized he wasn't alone. Leaning against the far wall, arms crossed casually over his chest, was himself. Or rather, the version of himself who ruled 17 galaxies with an iron fist. Emperor Mark watched him with calculating eyes, his posture deceptively relaxed despite the coiled power evident in every line of his body. He wore a simplified version of his imperial regalia, a fitted black uniform with subtle red accents, no cape, no crown, yet somehow more intimidating for its understated elegance. "Finally awake," Emperor Mark observed, his voice neutral. "You've been out for nearly 6 hours." Mark bolted upright, instantly alert, his muscles tensing for combat. "Where's Eve? Where's Megumi?" He launched himself forward with explosive speed, but Emperor Mark was faster, impossibly, unnaturally faster. Before Mark could even register the movement, he found himself pinned against the wall, the Emperor's forearm pressed against his throat with just enough pressure to demonstrate control without causing actual harm. "Let's not do this," Emperor Mark said, his voice calm despite the physical confrontation. "You're in my palace, in my dimension, surrounded by my guards. Even if you somehow manage to overpower me, which you won't, You'd never find your friends without my help. Mark struggled against the hold, his Viltrumite strength impressive, but clearly outmatched. If you've hurt them, they're fine, Emperor Mark interrupted, maintaining his grip with effortless precision. Eve is recovering in the East Wing. Megumi is being attended to by medical staff in the royal quarters. Neither is in any danger. He eased the pressure slightly, though he didn't release his hold. I'm going to let you go now. We're going to talk like civilized people. Like the brothers we essentially are. Okay. Mark glared at his counterpart, hatred and frustration burning in his eyes. But beneath the anger was a flicker of uncertainty. The manic intensity he'd witnessed in the Emperor during their confrontation on Earth was notably absent, replaced by a controlled composure that was somehow more unsettling. After a moment of tense silence, Mark gave a single reluctant nod. Emperor Mark released him and stepped back, maintaining a cautious distance. Good choice. Mark straightened his clothing, standard-issue garments provided by palace staff he assumed, and took a deep breath, forcing himself to think strategically rather than emotionally. You said they're safe. Prove it. Without taking his eyes off Mark, Emperor Mark tapped a small device on his wrist. A holographic display materialized in the air between them, showing two separate video feeds. In one, Eve sat in a comfortable-looking chamber, apparently deep in conversation with her counterpart. In the other, Sukuna reclined on a medical bed, surrounded by advanced technology, while attendants moved efficiently around him. Live feeds, Emperor Mark explained. Updated every 30 seconds for security purposes. As you can see, they're both unharmed and being treated with appropriate respect. Mark studied the images intently, searching for any sign of distress or coercion. Finding none, he felt some of the tension leave his body. When can I see them? Soon, Emperor Mark promised. But first, I think you and I need to have a conversation. One that's long overdue. He gestured toward the door. Walk with me. Mark hesitated, weighing his options. Fighting would be futile, that much was clear from their brief physical encounter. Escaping was equally unlikely without knowledge of the palace layout or the location of his friends. For now, cooperation seemed the only viable strategy. Fine, he agreed reluctantly. Lead the way. Emperor Mark nodded in approval and opened the door, revealing a corridor of polished stone that seemed to glow with an inner light. Two guards stood at attention outside, tall, imposing figures in armor that Mark suspected could withstand even Viltrumite's strength. Stand down, Emperor Mark ordered as they passed. We won't be needing an escort. The guards bowed and stepped aside, their movements precise and practiced. Mark noted the mixture of fear and reverence in their eyes as they watched the Emperor pass, the look of men who served out of both duty and dread. They walked in silence through a series of increasingly ornate corridors, each more impressive than the last. The architecture was unlike anything Mark had seen before, blending elements that seemed both ancient and futuristic, Earth-like and alien. Occasionally they passed other palace staff or officials, all of whom immediately bowed or saluted before hurrying on their way. Where are we going? Mark finally asked as they entered a vast atrium filled with plants he didn't recognize. Trees with silver leaves, flowers that seemed to pulse with inner light. Somewhere private, Emperor Mark replied. Somewhere Megumi and I used to go when we needed to think, to plan, to be away from the demands of the Empire. They continued through the atrium and down a narrower corridor that appeared to be carved directly into living rock. At its end stood a simple door, conspicuously plain amid the grandeur of the palace. Emperor Mark placed his palm against the door, which glowed briefly before sliding open. After you. Mark stepped through into what appeared to be a natural cavern, transformed into something between a study and a meditation chamber. Soft lights embedded in the rock walls illuminated a space furnished with simple cushions, low tables, and shelves lined with books and scrolls, actual physical texts rather than digital displays. A small waterfall cascaded down one wall, creating a soothing background murmur. What is this place? Mark asked, his hostility momentarily forgotten as he took in the unexpected sanctuary. We called it the Quiet Room, Emperor Mark explained, closing the door behind them. Megumi designed it himself after we first came to Viltrum. Said he needed somewhere the Empire couldn't reach us, even for a few hours. He moved to one of the cushions and sat, gesturing for Mark to do the same. No surveillance here. No guards. No imperial protocols. Just peace. Something that became increasingly rare as our influence expanded. Mark cautiously took a seat opposite the Emperor, still wary but increasingly curious. Why bring me here? Emperor Mark was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful as he gazed at the waterfall. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its imperial authority, sounding more like the Mark Grayson he had once been. Because I owe you an explanation, he said. And an apology. Mark blinked in surprise. An apology? I was unfair to you, Emperor Mark continued, meeting his counterpart's gaze directly. In my desperation to reclaim Megumi, I disregarded your own connection to him. I tried to take your best friend, whether he was mine first or not, and in doing so, I acted against everything Megumi ever taught me. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar that Mark felt a strange disconnect. This was him in some fundamental way, despite the vast differences in their experiences. I disappointed myself, Emperor Mark admitted. And worse, I disappointed Megumi's memory. He would have been displeased with my methods. Mark studied his counterpart, searching for deception and finding none. That's not what I expected you to say. A small, rueful smile touched Emperor Mark's lips. Having him back, even if he doesn't remember me, even if he's changed, it's cleared my head somewhat. 17 years of obsession doesn't disappear overnight, but seeing him again, being in his presence, it's brought back more than just the pain of losing him. It's reminded me of who I was when he was alive, who he helped me become. Flashback. The memory surfaced with vivid clarity. 16-year-old Mark Grayson sitting on the roof of Reginald Vell Johnson High School, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Your father's expectations are unreasonable, a calm voice observed. Mark looked up to find Megumi standing a few feet away, his expression as composed as always despite the precarious height. How did you find me? Mark asked, hastily wiping tears from his face. Process of elimination, Megumi replied, moving to sit beside him with careful precision. You weren't at any of your usual locations. Logic suggested you would seek elevation, a psychological response to feeling metaphorically weighed down by expectations. Despite everything, Mark found himself smiling slightly. Only you would psychoanalyze someone's hiding spot. Megumi shrugged, the gesture almost imperceptible. Efficiency in locating you meant more time for addressing the actual problem. He sat in silence for a moment, giving Mark space to collect himself. Your father's training session today. It didn't go well. It wasn't a question, but Mark answered anyway. He said I'm too soft. That I'm not progressing fast enough. That a real Viltrumite would have mastered flight maneuvers by now. Your father's perspective is flawed, Megumi stated, his tone matter-of-fact rather than consoling. He judges your progress against an arbitrary standard based on pure Viltrumite development. Your hybrid physiology necessitates a different timeline. He turned slightly, meeting Mark's gaze directly. Additionally, his definition of softness is based on a cultural paradigm that values dominance over strategy, brute force over precision. It's an outdated model even within Viltrumite society, which is why their conquest efforts have become increasingly inefficient. Mark stared at him. How do you make your dad's wrong sound like a scientific paper? The faintest hint of a smile touched Megumi's lips. Because it is scientific. Your development follows a different curve than a pure Viltrumite's. Your strengths manifest in different ways. These are observable facts, not opinions. He looked out over the school grounds, his expression thoughtful. Your father sees only what you haven't yet become. He fails to observe what you already are. And what's that? Mark asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Someone who questions rather than simply obeys, Megumi replied. Someone who considers the implications of power rather than merely exercising it. Someone who values connection over domination. He paused. These are strengths, Mark. not weaknesses. Mark was silent for a long moment, processing this perspective. He doesn't see it that way. Then his vision is limited, Megumi said simply. And you should not allow his limitations to define your potential. He stood with fluid grace, offering a hand to Mark. Come. I've developed a new training protocol that will work with your hybrid physiology rather than against it. We'll demonstrate your progress in ways even your father can't dismiss. Mark took the offered hand, feeling something shift inside him, a new confidence, a different kind of strength. Thanks, Megumi. No need for gratitude, Megumi replied as they made their way toward the roof access door. Your success validates my methodology. It's mutually beneficial. Mark smiled, recognizing the statement for what it was, Megumi's way of saying, that's what friends are for, without using such emotionally direct language. Always trying to distance himself, to not get hurt. Mark sometimes wonders what it was that could have possibly made him this way, what hurt him, and how can he destroy it? Still, Mark insisted, thanks for finding me. Megumi glanced at him, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. I will always find you, Mark. That's what brothers do. He was more than my best friend, Emperor Mark said, his eyes distant with memory. He was my brother in everything but blood. My teacher. My guide. He looked down at his hands, hands that had conquered worlds, that had killed thousands. In many ways, he was more of a father to me than Nolan ever was. Mark shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in these words despite his continued wariness. He sounds a lot like my Megumi. Sukuna. Emperor Mark nodded. Because they're the same person at their core. Different experiences, different names perhaps, but the same fundamental essence. The same soul. Another memory emerged, 17-year-old Mark hovering unsteadily in the air above the Viltrumite training grounds, struggling to maintain position while holding a massive weight in each hand. Your flight control is deteriorating, Megumi observed from the ground, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance. Recalibrate your core stabilization. Easy for you to say. Mark called back, sweat pouring down his face as he fought to maintain altitude. You're not the one holding half a ton in each hand. The weight is irrelevant, Megumi replied calmly. Your Viltrumite strength is more than adequate for the task. The issue is your mental approach. He made a small adjustment to something on the tablet he was holding. You're treating flight and strength as separate functions. They're integrated aspects of the same physiological system. Redirect your focus. Mark gritted his teeth, trying to follow the instruction despite his frustration. I don't understand what that means. Yes, you do, Megumi countered, his voice taking on that particular tone of absolute certainty that somehow always managed to cut through Mark's doubts. Stop thinking about flying while lifting. Simply exist in your complete capability. Something in the phrasing clicked for Mark. He closed his eyes briefly, mentally shifting his approach. Instead of concentrating on maintaining altitude while also supporting the weights, he simply was. When he opened his eyes, he found himself hovering with perfect stability, the weights feeling suddenly almost weightless. Like a feather. How did you know that would work? He called down to Megumi, genuine wonder in his voice. Because I know you, Megumi replied simply. Better than you know yourself, in some ways. He made another adjustment on his tablet. Now, execute flight pattern Theta 7 while maintaining your current load. Mark groaned but complied, beginning the complex series of aerial maneuvers they had developed together. To his surprise, he found himself moving with unprecedented precision, the weights no longer hampering his flight but somehow enhancing his control through their consistent resistance. Later, as they sat reviewing the data from the training session, Mark shook his head in amazement. How do you always know exactly what I need to hear? Megumi continued scrolling through the performance metrics, his expression focused. Pattern recognition. Observation. Analysis of previous successful instructional approaches. He glanced up, meeting Mark's gaze. And perhaps some intuition, since that doesn't hurt. Mark laughed. Did you just admit to having a gut feeling? I admit that there is logic to instincts one has, though one must always think through what triggers these intuitions. Megumi corrected, though there was the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. So don't misrepresent my statement in acting without thinking. Right, Mark agreed, still grinning. Heaven forbid anyone think you operate on anything but pure logic. Megumi's expression grew more serious. The training is progressing well. Your father will be impressed. Mark's smile faded slightly. That's the goal, right? No, Megumi said firmly. The goal is your development as a balanced individual capable of utilizing your abilities effectively and ethically. Your father's approval is incidental, not central. He set down the tablet, giving Mark his full attention, a rare occurrence that always signaled the importance of what would follow. Mark, you must understand something fundamental. Your worth is not determined by your father's assessment. Your path is not defined by his expectations. Then what defines it? Mark asked quietly. Your choices, Megumi replied without hesitation. Your values. Your understanding of responsibility and consequence. These are the metrics that matter, not Nolan's arbitrary standards of Viltrumite adequacy. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. You have the potential to be something greater than what Viltrumite culture envisions. Not because of your strength or speed, but because you question. Because you care. Because you see power as a means rather than an end. Mark stared at him, startled by the uncharacteristic passion in his usually composed friend's voice. You really believe that? I don't believe things without evidence, Megumi stated flatly. I observe. I analyze. I conclude. And my conclusion, based on extensive data, is that you are capable of redefining what it means to be Viltrumite, of evolving beyond the limitations of their cultural paradigm. He picked up the tablet again, returning to his review of the performance metrics. Now, regarding your deceleration rate during the inverted maneuvers. But Mark barely heard the technical analysis that followed, too struck by the realization that someone whose opinion he valued above almost anyone else's, saw in him a potential he had never fully recognized in himself. He taught me everything, Emperor Mark continued, his voice taking on a reverent quality. Not just how to use my powers, but how to think. How to lead. How to see beyond the immediate to the strategic. How to build something lasting rather than simply conquering. He gestured at their surroundings. This empire exists because of him. Not just because I built it in his memory, but because he designed its fundamental structure, its principles of governance, its approach to expansion and integration. All of it, conceived by a human teenager with a mind unlike any I've ever encountered. Mark found himself nodding despite his continued suspicion. That sounds like him. Always 3 steps ahead, seeing patterns no one else can see. Exactly, Emperor Mark agreed, leaning forward slightly. That's why I was so desperate to find him again. Not just because I missed my friend, my brother, but because the Empire needs him. I need him. His guidance, his perspective, his ability to see beyond conventional thinking. His expression darkened with remembered grief. When my father killed him, he didn't just take my best friend. He took my moral compass. My strategic advisor. The one person who could tell me when I was wrong and make me listen. Flashback. The memory was sharper, more painful. 18-year-old Mark standing in the Viltrumite High Council chamber, his clothing still stained with his father's blood, his eyes wild with grief and rage. The traitor Nolan Grayson has been executed for his crimes against the Empire, he announced, his voice carrying across the vast space. I claim his position and authority by right of conquest. Murmurs spread through the assembled council members, some approving, others clearly alarmed by this unprecedented challenge to the established order. Thrag, Grand Regent of the Viltrumite Empire, rose from his central throne, his massive frame towering over the young hybrid. You presume much, boy. Nolan's actions, while regrettable, were within his rights as a Viltrumite commander disciplining a human who had forgotten his place. Mark's fists clenched, the floor beneath him cracking from the pressure of his barely contained rage. Megumi Fushiguro was under imperial protection. His strategic value to the empire was beyond calculation. My father's action was not discipline, it was treason. Careful, half-breed, Thrag warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. You stand on the edge of treason yourself. No, Mark replied, his voice suddenly cold, controlled, channeling Megumi's calm precision rather than his own emotional turmoil. I stand at the beginning of a new era for the Viltrumite Empire. One where strength serves strategy rather than ego. Where conquest has purpose beyond mere dominance. He stepped forward, addressing the entire council rather than just Thrag. For too long, this empire has expanded without direction, conquered without vision. Megumi Fushiguro provided that vision, a path to more efficient conquest, to sustainable rule, to an empire that would last millennia rather than burn bright and collapse under its own weight. Several council members nodded, clearly swayed by this argument. Megumi's strategic brilliance had proven itself too many times to be dismissed, even by those who despised his human status. And now you believe yourself capable of implementing this vision? Thrag asked, contempt evident in his voice. No, Mark admitted, surprising everyone with his candor. I am not Megumi. I don't have his mind, his insight, his ability to see patterns across centuries of development. He straightened, his resolve hardening. But I have his plans. His strategies. His detailed projections for imperial expansion and governance. And I have something else, something he valued above all else. And what might that be? Thrag demanded. The willingness to learn, Mark replied simply. To adapt. To evolve beyond outdated paradigms that no longer serve our purpose. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. Megumi Fushiguro may be dead, but his vision for this empire lives on. The question before this council is simple. Will you embrace that vision and the prosperity it promises? Or will you cling to traditions that have left us with barely 100 Viltrumites where once there were billions? The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly, one of the elder council members rose from his seat. The boy speaks wisdom beyond his years. Perhaps there is merit in hearing more of these plans. Others began to nod, murmurs of agreement spreading through the chamber. Thrag remained standing, his expression thunderous, but even he could sense the shifting mood of the council. This discussion is premature, he declared, attempting to reassert control. The boy has no standing to address this council, much less propose changes to our imperial doctrine. I disagree, came a new voice from the chamber entrance. All heads turned to see Eve standing there, her clothing still stained with Megumi's blood and her own, her face pale but determined. Mark Grayson has proven his strength by defeating Nolan, a full-blooded Viltrumite. By your own laws, that gives him standing. She moved forward to stand beside Mark, her presence lending him additional credibility. Furthermore, as the designated executor of Megumi Fushiguro's strategic plans, I can confirm that Mark has full access to and understanding of the imperial restructuring proposals that this council has already approved in principle. Thrag's eyes narrowed dangerously. You dare, human? You think your word carries weight here? My word? Perhaps not, Eve conceded, her voice steady despite the threat looming before her. But the empirical results of Megumi's strategies? Those speak for themselves. 63% reduction in Viltrumite casualties. 47% increase in territorial gains. 38% improvement in resource allocation efficiency. She looked around the chamber, her scientific precision matching Megumi's strategic brilliance. These are not opinions. They are measurable outcomes that this council has already acknowledged and approved. To abandon them now would be to choose ego over efficiency, tradition over success. Thrag's expression darkened further, rage building in his eyes. With a roar of fury, he launched himself at Mark, moving with a devastating speed that had made him the most feared Viltrumite in the Empire. But Mark was ready. In the years before Megumi's death, they had trained together extensively, preparing for this very possibility. Megumi had recognized Thrag's inevitable opposition and had developed specialized techniques to counter the Grand Regent's possible fighting styles. Every possibility. To perfection. Most importantly, Megumi had taught Mark how to control his smart atoms, the fundamental particles that gave Viltrumites their extraordinary abilities. While Nolan had focused on brute strength and speed, Megumi had shown Mark how to manipulate his atomic structure at a molecular level, granting him unprecedented control over his own physiology. As Thrag's fist hurtled toward him, Mark didn't dodge or block in the conventional sense. Instead, he stood perfectly still, his expression calm as the Grand Regent's attack connected with his face with enough force to shatter a planet's crust. The impact created a shockwave that shattered the council chamber's windows and sent cracks racing across the ancient stone floor. But Mark himself remained unmoved, his body completely unaffected by the devastating blow. Thrag staggered backward, genuine shock registering on his face for perhaps the first time in centuries. "Impossible," he gasped, staring at his own fist as if it had betrayed him. "No," Mark replied simply, his stance relaxed and confident. "Just the result of understanding Viltrumite physiology better than Viltrumites themselves." He took a single step forward, the movement casual yet somehow profoundly threatening. "Megumi taught me how to control my smart atoms at a fundamental level. Not just for strength or speed, but for perfect structural integrity. My body doesn't break, doesn't damage, doesn't feel pain. My atoms remain exactly where I want them, regardless of outside force." Thrag's shock gave way to rage. With a bellow that shook the chamber, he charged again, unleashing a barrage of strikes that would have pulverized planets, each blow landing with catastrophic force but producing no effect whatsoever on Mark's uncompromised form. It was like attacking a statue made from the heart of a neutron star, an immovable, indestructible object that absorbed every impact without registering the slightest damage. After exhausting his initial fury, Thrag stepped back, his breathing heavy not from exertion but from disbelief. "What are you?" he demanded. "The future," Mark replied, his voice eerily calm in a way that reminded everyone present of Megumi's clinical detachment. "The evolution of Viltrumite potential, guided by human innovation." With that, Mark moved, a single precise strike delivered with perfect form. His fist connected with Thrag's chest, the impact transferring energy directly into the Grand Regent's body while Mark's own form remained completely stable, not even shifting from the recoil. Thrag flew backward, crashing through multiple support columns before embedding in the far wall, blood erupting from his mouth as internal organs ruptured from the perfectly calculated strike. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over in seconds. The council chamber lay in ruins, and Thrag, the undefeated champion of the Viltrumite Empire for thousands of years, hung embedded in the wall, broken and defeated by a single blow. "Impossible," one of the council members whispered, staring at the fallen Grand Regent in disbelief. "No," Eve corrected, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Inevitable. This is the future Megumi Fushiguro envisioned, a future where intelligence guides strength, where strategy supersedes brute force." Mark stood in the center of the destruction, completely unmarked, not a hair out of place, his expression calm as he addressed the stunned council. "I claim the position of Emperor by right of conquest," he declared, his voice echoing through the ruined chamber. "Any who oppose me may challenge now or accept my authority." Not a single council member moved. The demonstration had been too definitive, too overwhelming to invite further resistance. They had just witnessed something beyond their understanding, a Viltrumite who could truly not be harmed, who could not be moved, who stood as the living embodiment of their species' image, invincible. "The Civil War lasted a single day," Emperor Mark said, his expression distant with memory. "There was not much of a war after that, not really. There were those who ganged up on me, hundreds of Viltrumites, but died all the same. For I was truly, utterly invincible, made so by Megumi's training, by his understanding of how to control smart atoms in ways that even pure Viltrumites had never mastered. I declared myself emperor that same day," Emperor Mark continued, his gaze focused on some distant point as he recalled the events that had shaped his reign. "Not out of ambition or ego, but because it was the most efficient way to implement Megumi's vision for the Empire. The Council recognized my authority immediately, not just because of my strength, but because they had already seen the results of Megumi's strategies." He looked down at his hands, hands that had conquered worlds, that had killed thousands. "Eve was instrumental in the transition. While I provided the necessary strength to maintain order, She interpreted and implemented Megumi's plans with as close as one can get to his perspective. Together, we built the framework for what would become a galactic empire spanning 17 systems. His expression darkened with remembered grief. But we did it without him. Without his guidance, his insights, his ability to see connections and patterns that no one else could perceive. We had his plans, his strategies, but not his mind, not his capacity to adapt those plans to changing circumstances. Mark shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in these words despite his continued wariness. He looked up, meeting Mark's gaze directly. That's why finding him again meant everything to me. Why I was willing to tear apart reality itself, for even the chance of bringing him back. Not just to fill the void his death left in me personally, but once again because the Empire, the vision he created, needs him. Mark studied his counterpart, searching for deception and finding none. I think I understand. But that doesn't justify kidnapping him, kidnapping all of us, and bringing us here against our will. No, it doesn't, Emperor Mark agreed, surprising Mark with his candor. As I said, I was unfair. I acted out of desperation rather than principle. I failed to honor what Megumi taught me about respecting individual choice, about the difference between conquest and true leadership. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so familiar it was disconcerting. I can't undo what I've done. But I can try to make it right, or at least less wrong. How? Mark asked, his tone skeptical despite his growing understanding. By giving you a choice, Emperor Mark replied. All of you. I won't force Megumi to stay if he truly wishes to return to your dimension. I won't keep you or Eve prisoner here against your will. He held up a hand before Mark could respond. But before you make that choice, I ask only that you take the time to understand what this empire is. What it could offer all of you. The resources, the technology, the opportunity to affect change on a galactic scale rather than being limited to a single planet. Mark studied his counterpart, searching for deception and finding none. And if we still choose to leave, then I will find a way to send you home, Emperor Mark promised. It won't be immediate. The dimensional technology we used to reach your world was experimental, and the return protocols are still being refined. But I give you my word that if, after seeing what we've built here, you still wish to return to Earth, I will make it happen. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Mark found himself believing his counterpart despite his initial distrust. Why the change of heart? You were ready to tear the world apart to get Megumi back. Now you're offering to let him go. Emperor Mark was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Because having him here, seeing him again, even changed as he is, has reminded me of who I was when he was alive. Who he helped me become. He met Mark's gaze directly. Megumi would be disappointed in what I've become in his absence. In the methods I've employed, the lines I've crossed. He always believed that power without principle was merely tyranny, that conquest without purpose was empty victory. A small, sad smile touched his lips. I've spent 17 years building an empire in his name, while gradually betraying the fundamental principles he taught me. It took seeing him again, seeing the disapproval in his eyes when I tried to force him to come with me, to make me recognize how far I've strayed from his vision. Mark nodded slowly, recognition dawning. He has that effect on people. That ability to make you want to be better just by being in his presence. Exactly, Emperor Mark agreed, something like relief crossing his features at being understood. So I'm trying to be better now. To honor his memory, and his present self, by acting according to the principles he valued. Starting with respecting your autonomy, your right to choose your own path. He stood, moving toward the small waterfall that continued its soothing cascade down the cavern wall. I won't pretend I don't hope you'll choose to stay. That Megumi won't find something familiar in this empire, in the vision he himself created. But the choice must be yours, freely made. Mark rose as well, his stance more relaxed though still alert. I want to see them. Eve and Megumi. I need to know they're truly all right. Of course, Emperor Mark agreed immediately. I'll take you to them now, if you wish. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back with an expression of unexpected vulnerability. Whatever you decide, Mark, I hope you understand that I never saw you as an enemy. In my world, you and I were as close as brothers, united by our shared love for Megumi and our commitment to his vision. He extended his hand, not imperiously, not with any hint of command, but as one equal to another. Perhaps in time, we might find some version of that brotherhood again. Different, certainly, shaped by our different experiences, but built on mutual respect rather than conflict. Mark hesitated, studying the offered hand and the man extending it. This was still the being who had kidnapped them, who had threatened to destroy Earth if he didn't get his way. But it was also a version of himself who had experienced loss beyond imagination, who had built an empire according to the principles of someone they both admired, who was now attempting, however imperfectly, to make amends. After a moment of consideration, Mark reached out and clasped the Emperor's hand. I'm not making any promises, but I'll listen. I'll look. And I'll keep an open mind. Emperor Mark nodded, acceptance rather than triumph in his expression. That's all I can ask. The sun rose over a changed world. The green dimensional energy that had rippled across the sky for days was gone, leaving only the familiar blue of Earth's atmosphere. But the scars of what had happened remained, in the landscape, in the memories, and in the hearts of those left behind. Original Mark flew alongside Nolan and Original Eve, their path taking them back to the GDA facility. The devastated commercial district fell away behind them, giving way to suburbs and then the government sector where the facility stood. None of them spoke. What was there to say? Their counterparts, alternate Mark, alternate Eve, and Sukuna were gone, pulled through a dimensional portal into the Emperor's reality. The victory of reversing the merger felt hollow in the face of such a loss. We'll find them, Mark said, breaking the silence as they approached the GDA building. Whatever it takes. Eve nodded, her scientific mind already cataloging possibilities. If dimensional travel happened once, it can happen again. We just need to understand the mechanics. It won't be easy, Mark Nolan cautioned, his expression grim, having lost his own son, and the boy who despite his attempts at distance had begun to see as his son as well. The Emperor's reality could be anywhere in the multiverse, finding one specific dimension among infinite possibilities. We'll find it, Mark insisted, his jaw set with determination. We have to. As they descended toward the GDA facility, Mark noticed something wrong. The building's security perimeter had been breached, with sections of the outer wall torn away as if by immense force. Something's happened, he warned, accelerating toward the damage. They landed in what had once been the facility's main entrance, now a gaping hole surrounded by twisted metal and shattered concrete. Inside, alarm lights flashed silently, the accompanying sirens disabled. Be careful, Nolan advised, taking point as they moved deeper into the facility. Whatever did this could still be here. They found the first signs of resistance in the main corridor, GDA agents unconscious but alive, scattered across the floor like discarded toys. Medical staff were already tending to them, moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to crisis. What happened here? Mark demanded, helping a dazed agent to her feet. Someone broke in, the agent managed, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Tore through our defenses like they were paper. Headed straight for the lower levels. The containment areas, Eve realized, where they were keeping Battle Beast's body. Mark's expression darkened. Let's go. They moved quickly through the facility, following the path of destruction. Each level showed signs of a powerful being's passage, walls punctured, security doors torn from their hinges, more injured but mercifully alive personnel. On the fifth sublevel, they found both Cecils coordinating a response team, their identical expressions of controlled concern almost comical despite the situation. Mark, Original Cecil acknowledged, relief evident in his voice. You're back. The merger, reversed, Mark confirmed. but our counterparts were pulled through to the Emperor's dimension. What happened here? We're still assessing, Altered Cecil replied, gesturing toward the monitoring stations where technicians worked frantically. Something breached our perimeter approximately 47 minutes ago. It moved too fast for our cameras to track clearly. Arome and the Itadori boy are checking the lower levels, Original Cecil added. We believe the intruder was headed for dash. A deafening roar interrupted him, the sound reverberating through the facility with enough force to shake dust from the ceiling. The morgue, both Cecils said in unison. Mark didn't wait. He shot down the corridor, following the sound with Eve and Nolan close behind. They descended 2 more levels, the roars growing louder, now accompanied by crashes and the sound of metal tearing. They burst into the morgue antechamber to find Arome maintaining an ice barrier around the entrance to the main chamber, her expression strained as she fought to contain whatever was inside. It arrived minutes ago, she explained, ice crystals forming in the air around her as she reinforced the barrier. Broke through all defenses like they weren't there. What is it? Mark demanded, preparing himself for combat. Arome's expression was grim. Battle beast. But not the one that died here. Another variant? Eve asked, her powers flaring in preparation. No, Yuji Itadori said, emerging from a side corridor. Though still weakened from his ordeal with Shibuya Sukuna, the young man stood tall, his eyes reflecting a determination that belied his exhausted appearance. It's your world's one. The one from your timeline. As if to confirm his words, another roar shook the facility, followed by the sound of Arome's ice barrier shattering. The doors to the morgue blew outward, and through the cloud of ice and debris emerged a figure they all recognized. Battle Beast stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the morgue's emergency lighting. Blood, not his own, covered his muzzle and chest, dripping onto the floor in a steady rhythm. In his hands, he held what appeared to be a half-eaten arm, the flesh torn and ragged where his teeth had ripped through muscle and bone. For a moment, no one moved. Then Battle Beast's eyes focused on them, recognition and something like shame flickering across his bestial features. With a roar that seemed more frustration than rage, he hurled the arm aside and charged, not at them but at the wall beside them. The reinforced concrete crumbled under his assault, creating a new exit that he immediately used, disappearing into the depths of the facility. After him, Original Cecil ordered through their communicators. Containment teams to Sub-Level 7. Mark was already moving, flying through the hole Battle Beast had created. The others followed, tracking the alien warrior through his path of destruction. They found him in a large storage area, surrounded by the remains of security drones that had attempted to stop him. He stood with his back to a wall, chest heaving, eyes darting between the various entrances as if expecting an attack from all sides. Battle Beast, Nolan called out, his voice carrying both authority and caution. Stand down. We don't want to fight you. The alien warrior's eyes fixed on Nolan, recognition dawning. Omni-Man, he growled, his voice rougher than they remembered. You live. Good. A worthy opponent should not fall to mere dimensional chaos. What were you doing in the morgue? Mark demanded, hovering cautiously out of immediate reach. Battle Beast's expression shifted, something like embarrassment crossing his features before hardening back into its usual fierce mask. What I had to do, he replied cryptically. You were eating the other Battle Beast's remains, Eve stated, her understanding cutting through to the heart of the matter. Why? For a moment, it seemed Battle Beast might attack her for the directness of the question. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a harsh barking sound that held little humor. Instinct, he admitted, wiping blood from his muzzle with the back of his hand. When the green light in the sky began to intensify before it began to fade, I felt compelled, driven by something beyond conscious thought. I had to find my other self. Had to consume what remained. But why? Yuji asked, stepping forward despite the danger. Unlike the others, who maintained combat readiness, the young man approached Battle Beast directly, showing no fear despite the alien's blood-covered appearance. Battle Beast studied him, perhaps sensing something different in this human who had once housed a being of immense power. To survive, he said simply. When dimensions merge, Duplicates cannot exist side by side indefinitely. One must prevail. One must continue. My primal instincts overcame me. By consuming your counterpart, Eve realized, her scientific mind racing ahead. You ensured it would be you who survived the merger's aftermath. Yes, Battle Beast confirmed. Though the merger has been reversed, its effects linger. Those who consumed their counterparts have evolved, grown stronger. He flexed his massive arms, and they all noticed what they hadn't before. His musculature seemed denser, more defined. His presence more imposing, his energy signature subtly altered. I have absorbed his strength, Battle Beast continued. His experiences. His death. He looked directly at Nolan. I remember fighting the four-armed one. Being defeated with honor. Though it was not me, I carry the memory now as if it were. Nolan's expression darkened with sudden understanding. If this happened to the Viltrumites too, it would explain how strong Conquest was, Mark finished, the implications dawning on him. He must have found and consumed his counterpart during the merger. And if Thrag did the same. Eve began. Then the Grand Regent of the Viltrumite Empire is now twice as powerful as before, maybe even more, Nolan concluded grimly. Battle Beast snorted, the sound somewhere between dismissal and anticipation. More worthy opponents. Good. Is that all you think about? Fighting? Mark demanded, frustration coloring his voice. People are dead. Our friends are trapped in another dimension. The world is still recovering from what just happened. Battle Beast regarded him with something almost like pity. Young Viltrumite, you still do not understand. Battle is life. Challenge is purpose. Without these, existence is meaningless. There's more to life than fighting, Yuji said quietly, drawing Battle Beast's attention once more. The alien warrior studied him, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps, he conceded after a moment. But it is what I know. What I am. So what now? Eve asked, her powers still at the ready despite the apparent de-escalation of the situation. Are you here to challenge us? To fight? Battle Beast's laugh was genuine this time. No, Pink One. I am here to protect. This declaration surprised everyone, Mark most of all. Protect? Since when do you protect anything? Since I consumed the memories of my other self, Battle Beast replied. Since I felt his respect for the four-armed one who defeated him with honor. Since I understood what is coming. And what's that? Nolan asked carefully. Battle Beast's expression turned serious. Viltrumites will come. More and more, drawn to this world by reports of dimensional anomalies, by stories of beings who could challenge even their might. They will come seeking conquest, seeking to finish what was started. He straightened to his full height, his bearing suddenly regal despite the blood still drying on his fur. Until the four-armed one returns, I will stand as this world's guardian. For 2 reasons. He held up one clawed finger. First, Viltrumites make worthy opponents. The battles will be glorious. A second finger joined the first. Second, I am grateful to the one called Sukuna for giving my other self an honorable death. Counterpart or not, I remember it. I respect it. And I will honor it by protecting what he valued. The declaration hung in the air, unexpected and profound from a being they had only ever known as a ruthless gladiator, a creature of pure combat. How do we know we can trust you? Mark asked, still suspicious. Battle Beast's smile was all fangs. You don't. But consider this, young Viltrumite, if I wanted to kill you, would we still be talking? Nolan placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. He's right, Mark. If he wanted to kill us, then this talk would have been much shorter and a lot more violent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then both Cecils arrived, accompanied by security teams that immediately took up defensive positions around the perimeter. Stand down, Original Cecil ordered after assessing the situation. Maintain distance, but hold your fire. So, Altered Cecil said, addressing Battle Beast directly. You're offering your services as Earth's defender? Not Earth, Battle Beast corrected. The four-armed one's interests. Until he returns. And if he doesn't? Original Cecil pressed. Battle Beast's expression darkened. He will. And until then, I will fight what comes. It is payment of a debt. The Cecils exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. We'll need to discuss this, Original Cecil said finally. Arrangements would have to be made. Parameters established. Discuss all you wish, Battle Beast replied dismissively. I will be here when the Viltrumites come, whether you approve or not. With that, he strode forward, the security teams parting before him like water around a stone. No one moved to stop him as he made his way toward the exit. Where are you going? Mark called after him. Battle Beast paused, glancing back over his massive shoulder. To prepare. To hunt. To wait. A predatory smile spread across his blood-stained muzzle. The Viltrumites will come soon enough. And when they do, I will be ready. He continued on, his heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. Well, Original Cecil said dryly, that was unexpected. Can we trust him? Mark asked, looking to Nolan for guidance. His father's expression was thoughtful. Battle Beast lives by a strict code of honor. If he says he'll defend Earth in Sukuna's absence, I believe him. Whether his methods will align with our preferences is another matter entirely. We should keep tabs on him regardless, Altered Cecil decided. But having a being of his caliber as an ally, even temporarily, could prove valuable in the coming days. Speaking of coming days, Eve interjected, we need to focus on finding a way to reach the Emperor's dimension. To bring back our friends. Agreed, both Cecils said in unison. As the group began to disperse, Yuji spoke up. I'm going after Battle Beast, he announced, his voice carrying the same unwavering resolve that had once helped him resist Sukuna's influence. Everyone turned to look at the young man, surprise evident on their faces. That's not advisable, Original Cecil responded, his tone carrying the bureaucratic caution that defined his character. We have sophisticated tracking systems designed for precisely this purpose. No need to endanger yourself unnecessarily. Yuji shook his head, that familiar stubborn set to his jaw taking a formal tone and wording, gained from sharing memories with Sukuna for a time. With all respect, sir, cameras and fancy tech won't cut it with someone like him. He'll just smash them if he doesn't want to be watched. His eyes followed the path of destruction. Besides, I get him in a way you guys might not. How exactly do you figure that? Mark asked, his voice carrying that mixture of skepticism and genuine curiosity. Yuji's expression softened, his hand unconsciously moving to his chest where Sukuna's fingers had once been sealed. I had someone inside me who saw the world as nothing but a playground for the strong, who measured everything by power and dominance. But even Sukuna had moments of respect, honor for worthy opponents. Battle Beast has that same code. It's still dangerous, Nolan cautioned. He's unpredictable, with his new memories and enhanced strength even more than normal. That's exactly why someone should be there, Yuji insisted, that passionate conviction rising in his voice, the same quality that had once made him declare he wanted a proper death. Not to control him, I don't think anyone can, but to understand him. To help him see the line between protecting and destroying. A slight smile crossed his face. Plus, I'm probably the only one here he won't immediately try to pulverize if I annoy him. Eve studied him with that analytical gaze of hers. Your hypothesis is that your connection to Sukuna grants you some form of immunity? Partly, Yuji nodded. But mostly because I'm not a threat or a challenge to him. Just a regular guy trying to do the right thing. His expression hardened. And right now the right thing is making sure our new ally doesn't cause more destruction than protection while guarding what Sukuna valued. Arom, who had maintained her typical stoic silence, finally spoke. I shall accompany you, she stated with absolute finality. Yuji turned to her in surprise. You really don't have to dash Sukuna-sama's final directive before his departure, Arom interrupted, her tone carrying that unwavering devotion, was to ensure your continued well-being. He specifically commanded me to maintain your health and facilitate your recovery from the possession. This revelation visibly stunned Yuji. His eyes widened, his face showing complete disbelief. He actually said that? About me? Arome nodded. Sukuna-sama's reasons are his own and not for me to question. If you intend to pursue Battle Beast, then my duty compels me to accompany you. Yuji struggled to reconcile this information with everything he knew about Sukuna, the evil force of nature that had possessed him, that had reveled in destruction and death. That any version of the King of Curses would show concern for his well-being seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet Arome's unwavering certainty convinced him she was telling the truth. This dimension's Sukuna, different as he might be from the one Yuji had known, had commanded his most faithful servant to protect the vessel he had inhabited. "All right," Yuji finally said, regaining the determined optimism that defined him. "We'll go together then." "I still think this is a terrible idea," Mark said, that protective nature showing through. "Battle Beast isn't exactly the friendly type." "Sometimes the craziest path is the right one," Yuji replied with that characteristic grin. "Besides, between Arome's ice powers and my experience dealing with difficult personalities, I think we've got this covered." The Cecils exchanged another of their identical calculating glances, before original Cecil nodded reluctantly. "Very well. But you will maintain regular communication protocols, and at the first indication of hostility, you will request immediate extraction. Is that understood?" "You got it." Yuji agreed with a smile and thumbs up that seemed almost out of place given the gravity of the situation. "Let's do this," he said to Arome, as they began to leave. "We've got a beast to catch." As they headed toward the exit, following the swath of destruction Battle Beast had left behind, Yuji couldn't help but wonder what other challenges awaited him in this new world, and when exactly he'll find his way back to his own. He still had a purpose after all. 5 more fingers of Sukuna remain in his world, and he is the only one that can make sure that monster dies permanently, his life being forfeit a worthy price. His atonement, in his eyes. Until then he'll try to do as much good as he can. The Imperial Garden stretched for miles, a meticulously designed paradise that blended elements from 1,000 worlds. Crystal trees with leaves that chimed softly in the breeze stood alongside flowering plants whose blooms shifted color with the changing light. Fountains of liquid that formed various shapes before dissolving back into their basins. Sukuna walked these gardens with measured steps, taking in every detail with analytical precision. Behind him, always maintaining a respectful distance of exactly 3 paces, was Anissa, his assigned guardian, though they both knew the term was a polite fiction. She was his watcher, his jailer, his constant shadow. She was also, he had quickly realized, a valuable source of information. 4 days had passed since his arrival in this dimension. 4 days of careful observation, of mapping the palace layout, of assessing potential allies and enemies. 4 days of pretending to be weaker than he actually was, maintaining the illusion that the binding vow had left him genuinely depleted. Most importantly, 4 days of gathering intelligence about the Megumi Fushiguro of this world, the strategic genius whose death had shaped an empire and whose memory had driven an emperor to dimensional madness. "The cerulean orchids are particularly vibrant today," Anissa observed, breaking the comfortable silence that had developed between them during their morning walk. "They respond to emotional energy in their vicinity. The gardeners say they've never seen them this blue before." Sukuna paused, studying the flowers in question. Delicate blooms that seemed to pulse with an inner light, their color indeed a deep, almost hypnotic blue. "Emotional energy," he repeated, his tone neutral. "Did they work on the same principle as cursed energy but broader? This might need eventual investigating." "Interesting." "They were your favorite," Anissa continued, moving to stand beside him rather than behind for the first time that morning. "You had them planted throughout the palace gardens. Said they were useful indicators of emotional states people tried to hide." Sukuna nodded, filing away this information. Another piece of the puzzle, another fragment of the man whose identity he was both investigating and, to some extent, assuming. "Tell me more," he said, resuming his walk at a slower pace that invited conversation. "About myself. About what I was capable of." Anissa studied him for a moment, her expression carefully neutral despite the intensity in her eyes. You were asking about your abilities yesterday as well. Are you starting to remember? Fragments, Sukuna lied smoothly. Images, sensations. Nothing concrete. But I feel drawn to certain knowledge, as if my body remembers what my mind does not. It was a calculated response, designed to encourage her to share more information while maintaining the fiction that he might be recovering memories of a past life. The more they believed he might be their Megumi returning to himself, the more freely they would speak around him. Anissa seemed to accept this explanation, nodding as they continued along the garden path. You are not merely intelligent, she began, her voice taking on a reverent quality that Sukuna had noted whenever anyone in the palace spoke of this world's Megumi. You were transcendent. Your mind operated on levels that even the most advanced Viltrumite scientists couldn't comprehend. They approached a small pavilion overlooking an artificial lake, where exotic creatures with translucent bodies glided beneath the surface. Anissa gestured for him to sit on one of the stone benches, positioning herself where she could observe both him and their surroundings, ever the vigilant guard. By the time you were 15, she continued, you had developed nanomachines capable of enhancing human strength to Viltrumite levels. You used yourself as the test subject, naturally. Sukuna raised an eyebrow, genuine interest piqued. Nanomachines? Not genetic modification. You had your own pride, Anissa explained. You wanted to prove that humans could also be strong, to not be inferior to Viltrumites. And to a certain extent you did. She looked out over the lake, her expression distant with memory. I remember the first time you demonstrated their effectiveness. Thrag had arranged a combat trial, a test to see if your claims about the technology were valid. Flashback. The combat arena was circular, its walls reinforced with materials designed to withstand Viltrumite-level impacts. Observation platforms ringed the upper level, where the Viltrumite High Council watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. In the center of the arena stood Megumi Fushiguro, 15 years old but carrying himself with the composure of someone far older. He wore a simple black training uniform, no visible weapons or protection. His expression was calm, analytical, as he surveyed his surroundings. Across from him stood a Viltrumite warrior, not one of the elite, but still a formidable opponent with centuries of combat experience. The warrior smirked, clearly unimpressed by the human teenager he'd been ordered to fight. This is a waste of time, the warrior complained, loud enough for the observation platforms to hear. The human will be dead in seconds. Thrag, seated in the central position of honor, leaned forward slightly. Begin, he commanded, his voice echoing through the arena. The Viltrumite moved with blinding speed, crossing the distance between them in a fraction of a second, his fist aimed directly at Megumi's chest with enough force to shatter concrete. What happened next caused a ripple of shock through the watching council. Megumi didn't dodge. He didn't flinch. He simply raised his hand and caught the Viltrumite's fist mid-strike, the impact creating a shockwave that rippled visibly through the air but leaving the teenager completely unmoved. For a moment, the arena was utterly silent, the Viltrumite warrior staring in disbelief at his captured fist. Impossible, he whispered. Megumi's expression didn't change. No triumph, no effort, just the same calculating assessment. No, he replied calmly. Simply the application of advanced nanomechanical integration with human musculature and skeletal structure. The impossible becomes quite possible with sufficient understanding of molecular engineering. Before the warrior could respond, Megumi twisted, using the Viltrumite's own momentum against him in a throw that sent him crashing into the arena wall with enough force to crack the reinforced material. The warrior recovered quickly, rage replacing his initial shock. With a roar, he launched himself at Megumi again, this time holding nothing back. What followed wasn't so much a fight as a demonstration. Megumi moved with precision that bordered on prescience, each action perfectly calculated for maximum efficiency. He didn't just match the Viltrumite's strength, he applied it with a strategic understanding that made brute force irrelevant. From the observation platform, a young Anissa watched with growing fascination as the human teenager systematically dismantled a warrior who had conquered worlds. There was something almost beautiful about the precision of his movements, the economy of his actions. When the Viltrumite finally lay unconscious at Megumi's feet, the arena remained silent, the High Council too shocked to immediately respond. Megumi looked up at Thrag, his expression unchanged. "The demonstration is complete," he stated simply. "The nanomachines function as designed, allowing human physiology to match and, with proper application, exceed Viltrumite capabilities." Thrag's expression was unreadable as he studied the human who had just defeated one of his warriors. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement that carried immense weight coming from the Grand Regent. "Impressive," he said, the single word echoing in the silent arena. "Most impressive." As Megumi exited the arena, Anissa noticed something that others might have missed, a brief flicker of emotion crossing his usually composed features. Not pride or triumph, but something else. Something almost like loneliness. As if the victory meant nothing to him beyond its practical applications. It was the first time she had seen what would later become his most recognizable trait, the distant gaze that seemed to look beyond immediate circumstances to some greater pattern only he could perceive. The expression that would eventually earn him the name that would be whispered across galaxies, the Lonesome Devil. "After that demonstration, your status changed," Anissa continued, pulling herself back from the memory. "You were no longer viewed as merely Mark's human friend or a strategic advisor. You became something else, a power in your own right, respected and feared across the Empire." Sukuna absorbed this information with careful neutrality, though internally he was fascinated by the differences between this world's Megumi and his own experiences. The nanomachine enhancement was particularly interesting, a technological solution to power rather than the spiritual/cursed energy approach of his world. "And my relationship with Thrag," he prompted, sensing there was more to that dynamic than she had revealed. Anissa hesitated, her expression suggesting internal conflict. "That's complicated," she finally said. "Thrag was not known for respecting any species other than Viltrumites. But you were different." She glanced around, as if checking for listeners despite their isolated location in the gardens. "What I'm about to tell you might sound like treason to some, but you deserve to know the truth about your past." Sukuna nodded encouragingly, maintaining his facade of eager interest in recovering his memories. "Thrag cared for you," Anissa said, her voice dropping lower. "In his own way, he saw you as the son he never had. Not because of sentiment. Thrag would have considered such emotions weakness, but because he recognized in you a mind that could elevate the Viltrumite Empire beyond mere conquest to true galactic governance." Flashback. The Grand Regent's private chambers were Spartan compared to his public spaces, reflecting the military discipline that defined Viltrumite culture. Thrag stood by the viewing window, staring out at the stars, his massive frame silhouetted against the cosmic panorama. Behind him, seated at a workstation covered in holographic displays, Megumi worked tirelessly, his fingers moving with precise efficiency as he adjusted calculations for the upcoming Centauri campaign. It was late, well past the time when most of the palace staff had retired. But neither Thrag nor Megumi seemed to notice or care about the hour. Their work rhythms had synchronized over the years, both preferring the quiet productivity of night to the political performances required during the day. Anissa stood guard near the entrance, technically there to protect Thrag, though everyone knew the Grand Regent needed no such protection. In reality, her presence was more about protocol than necessity, and about Thrag's growing paranoia regarding the human who had become increasingly integral to Imperial operations. She watched as Megumi's movements gradually slowed, his usual precision giving way to the subtle but unmistakable signs of human exhaustion. 3 days without sleep, even for someone enhanced by nanomachines, was pushing biological limits. To her surprise, Thrag noticed as well. The Grand Regent turned from the window, studying the teenager with an expression that, on anyone else, might have been called concern. "You require rest," Thrag stated, his voice carrying its usual commanding tone but lacking the harshness he typically displayed toward subordinates. Megumi didn't look up from his work. "The Centauri calculations must be completed before the council meeting tomorrow. Sleep is inefficient at this juncture." Thrag moved closer, his shadow falling across Megumi's workstation. "Your efficiency is already compromised by fatigue. The biological limitations of your species cannot be entirely overcome, even with your enhancements." This time, Megumi did look up, meeting the Grand Regent's gaze directly, something few beings in the galaxy would dare. "The limitations of humanity are precisely what I'm working to transcend," he replied. "Each extension of my endurance provides valuable data for future modifications." "At what cost?" Thrag asked, the question surprising both Megumi and Anissa with its implication of concern for something beyond strategic value. Megumi's expression registered mild surprise before returning to its usual analytical calm. Cost-benefit analysis indicates the knowledge gained outweighs temporary physical discomfort. Thrag's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if your calculations are compromised by fatigue, what then?" "They won't be," Megumi stated with absolute certainty. "Nevertheless," Thrag insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you will rest now. The calculations can be completed after sufficient recovery time." For a moment, it seemed Megumi might argue further. Then, with a slight nod that acknowledged the logic of Thrag's position, if not the authority behind it, he saved his work and rose from the workstation. As he moved toward the door, his exhaustion finally manifested fully. He stumbled, his enhanced reflexes momentarily failing as fatigue overwhelmed his systems. What happened next shocked Anissa so deeply that she would later question whether she had imagined it. Thrag moved with his legendary speed, catching Megumi before he could fall. The Grand Regent's massive hands, capable of tearing planets apart, gently stabilized the teenager with a care that seemed utterly at odds with everything Anissa knew about him. "Your determination is admirable," Thrag said, his voice lower than usual. "But even the greatest strategists must recognize when tactical retreat is necessary." Without waiting for a response, Thrag lifted Megumi with both hands, with surprising gentleness, and carried him to a resting couch in the corner of the chamber, a piece of furniture that Anissa suddenly realized had been installed specifically for this purpose. As Thrag carefully laid the now unconscious teenager on the couch, Anissa saw something in the Grand Regent's expression that she had never witnessed before and would never see again. A softening, a moment of what in any other being might be called tenderness. "Monitor him," Thrag ordered, turning to Anissa with his usual authoritative manner restored. "Inform me when he wakes." As Thrag returned to the viewing window, resuming his contemplation of the stars, Anissa remained by the door, her worldview subtly but permanently altered by what she had witnessed. The mighty Thrag, Grand Regent of the Viltrumite Empire, feared throughout the galaxy for his ruthless strength, caring for a human teenager with a gentleness she would never have believed possible. Later, as she maintained her vigil, she studied the sleeping Megumi with new eyes. What was it about this human that could reach something in Thrag that centuries of Viltrumite companionship had never touched? The answer, she realized, lay in the very quality that had first caught her attention in the arena, that distant gaze, that sense of seeing beyond what others could perceive. Megumi Fushiguro wasn't just intelligent. He carried a perspective that transcended ordinary understanding, a vision that even Thrag, with all his power and experience, recognized as valuable beyond measure. "Thrag respected you enough to name you Emperor of Mankind," Anissa continued, her voice pulling Sukuna back to the present. "Earth was placed under your direct authority, unusual for a conquered world, but Thrag insisted. He said humanity needed a leader who understood their potential and their limitations equally." Sukuna absorbed this information with careful neutrality, though internally he was fascinated by the complex relationship being described. "And yet Nolan killed me," he observed. Despite this, connection with Thrag. Anissa's expression darkened, old rage flickering in her eyes. "Yes. In the most dishonorable way possible." She looked away, her jaw tightening with remembered fury. "You trusted him. Nolan was Toji's best friend, practically family to you. And he killed you when you were completely off guard, when you were asking him to be your daughter's godfather." The revelation hit with unexpected force, even though Sukuna had already known the basic outline of Megumi's death in this world. The additional context, the betrayal of trust, the timing coinciding with such a personal request, added layers of cruelty to an already tragic event. "My daughter," he repeated, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Eve was pregnant," Anissa confirmed, her voice softening slightly. "For months along. You were both so happy. It was unusual to see you that way, genuinely happy, without the weight of strategic considerations visibly pressing on you." She hesitated, then continued. After Nolan killed you, Eve lost the baby. The shock, the trauma. Her body couldn't maintain the pregnancy despite all your careful preparations, all the specialized blockers you designed to make it possible in the first place. Sukuna remained silent, processing this information. The parallel to his own situation, Eve pregnant with his child in this dimension, was not lost on him. It added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. When Thrag learned what had happened, Anissa continued, he was faced with an impossible choice. His care for you warred with how he was raised to value Viltrumites above all else. You were dead, and to choose your memory over a Viltrumite commander would have lowered the station of Viltrumites in the Empire, something unacceptable to someone raised to believe in Viltrumite supremacy. She looked at Sukuna directly, her expression intense. If you had been alive, I believe he would have chosen you over Nolan. But you were gone, and principles of Viltrumite hierarchy won out over his personal feelings. Leading to civil war, Sukuna concluded, pieces falling into place. Anissa nodded. Mark killed Nolan without hesitation when he found you. The Empire fractured. Those who valued your contributions and saw Nolan's action as treason against the Empire itself sided with Mark. Those who believed in absolute Viltrumite superiority, regardless of strategic value, sided with Thrag. And you? Sukuna asked, genuinely curious about her position in this conflict. Where did you stand? A complex emotion flickered across Anissa's face, something between shame and pride. I was Thrag's right hand before the war. His most trusted lieutenant. I believed in Viltrumite supremacy because I had never seen evidence to the contrary. She met his gaze directly. Until you. You showed me that true strength isn't about species or bloodlines. It's about vision, about seeing patterns others miss, about applying power with precision rather than brute force. It reminded me of Emperor Argol. So you switched sides, Sukuna observed. Not immediately, not in the first hours of the Day of Ends. That is what the war is called. Anissa admitted and explained. I fought for Thrag at first, out of loyalty if nothing else. But when I saw what Mark had become, how he had integrated your teachings, your strategies, your vision for what the Empire could be, I realized I was fighting against everything you had worked to build. Her expression hardened with resolve. I switched sides during the Battle of Proxima Centauri, turned on my own squadron, and helped Mark secure a decisive victory. He made me his left hand after that, Eve as his right, me as his left. The perfect balance of strategic vision and military strength. Sukuna nodded, filing away this information. Anissa's loyalty had shifted once before, from Thrag to Mark. That suggested potential flexibility that might be useful in the future. You called me something earlier, he said, changing direction slightly. The lonesome devil. What did that mean? Anissa's expression softened unexpectedly. It was what they called you across the galaxy. Not to your face, few would dare, but the name spread nonetheless. The most feared and respected human in the universe. But why lonesome? Sukuna pressed, sensing something significant in the descriptor. Something that resonated with him, with his second life as Sukuna, as well as something he couldn't really put his finger on. Because of the look you always carried, Anissa explained, her voice taking on an almost gentle quality. Even surrounded by people who cared for you, Mark, Eve, Toji, you always seemed apart. As if you were seeing things from a perspective so profound, so elevated, that it separated you from everyone else. She gestured vaguely toward the sky. Some cultures believed you had a divine perspective, that you could see the universe from above, perceiving patterns and connections invisible to ordinary minds. Others thought it was profound sadness, a burden of knowledge too heavy to share. Anissa's voice dropped lower, more intimate. I always thought it was loneliness. The isolation of being the only one who could see what you saw, who could understand what you understood. Even those closest to you, even Eve, couldn't fully comprehend the way your mind worked. Sukuna remained silent, struck by the unexpected accuracy of her assessment. The loneliness of perspective, of seeing what others could not. It resonated with his own experiences across multiple lifetimes. Your mere presence caused entire planets to surrender immediately, Anissa continued, her tone shifting to something approaching reverence. Your name made civilizations tremble. Not because of cruelty or brutality, you were never needlessly cruel, but because they knew resistance was futile against someone who had already calculated every possible outcome of conflict. She smiled slightly, the expression softening her usually stern features. The Emperor of Mankind, Thrag called you. A title given in genuine respect, acknowledging you as the pinnacle of what humanity could achieve. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Anissa's communication device. She checked it with practiced efficiency, her expression shifting back to professional neutrality. The Emperor requests your presence, she informed him, rising from her seat. He wishes to show you something he believes will help with your memory recovery. Sukuna nodded, rising as well. Their garden walk was over, but he had gained valuable information, not just about this world's Megumi, but about the complex web of relationships and loyalties that defined the imperial court. As they walked back toward the palace, Anissa maintained her usual 3 paces behind him, the perfect guard distance, close enough to protect, far enough to show respect. But something had shifted between them during their conversation. A connection had formed, tenuous but real, based on her devotion to the memory of who he had been in this world and his genuine interest in understanding that person. It was a connection he could potentially use, Sukuna thought coolly. Another piece on the board, another potential ally in this strange new game he found himself playing. Yet beneath the strategic calculation, a question lingered, one he wasn't entirely comfortable examining too closely. How much of this world's Megumi Fushiguro existed within him? How much of the lonesome devil's perspective, his vision, his fundamental nature, did Sukuna share? And if the answer was more than he cared to admit, what did that mean for his plans moving forward? As the palace loomed before them, its crystalline spires reaching toward the alien sky, Sukuna pushed these uncomfortable questions aside. For now, he would continue his careful information gathering, his strategic positioning. The Emperor was waiting, and with him undoubtedly, more pieces of the puzzle that was this strange new world and the ghost of himself that haunted it.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.